Yeah, we'll call Ms. Luna for her statement.
The circumstances surrounding UAPs has captivated the attention of the American people for decades, ingrained in even the minds of our nation's leaders from Jimmy Carter to Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton to Donald Trump, Marco Rubio to Chuck Schumer, John Radcliffe to National Security Council officials. Yet from Roswell, New Mexico to the coast of Jacksonville, Florida, the sightings of UAPs have rarely been explained by the people who have firsthand accounts of these situations. This is largely due to the lack of transparency by our own government and the failure of our elected leaders to make good on their promises to release explanations and footage and mountains of overclassified documents that continue to be hidden from the American people. This isn't just how I feel. In fact, the American people largely believe that the government has actively covered up the truth about UAPs. One poll in particular found that 68% of Americans believe that the government is hiding information about UAPs and not being honest about what we know about them. And from my personal experience, I believe the same thing. Another poll found that nearly half Americans believe that the federal government is doing a very bad or somewhat bad job of dealing with reports of UFO sightings. As Representative Burchett just referenced on the FAA bill that just went through, you can tell that that's exactly happening. Considering the thousands of testimonies and videos taken on people's phones and eyewitnesses' accounts made by credible witnesses such as doctors, pilots, scientists, and active duty service members, it is unacceptable to continue to gaslight Americans into thinking that this is not happening or that the potential of intelligent life forms exists other than humans. Even more alarming is the fact that these eyewitnesses are many of times service members and have no assurance that their lives will not be negatively impacted or even harmed by their experiences. In being an active duty service member working on an airfield, I've had conversations with many pilots where they were in fear of coming forward for retribution and or being taken off flight status. How do we know this? Because the government has said nothing to assure us otherwise. They have also done nothing to calm the concerns of over 20% of Americans who have reported to have seen UFOs or UAPs. We are simply told not to question the government and that the government has it under control. Today is the first hearing of its kind where we will attempt to get down to the bottom of what is actually happening with UAPs. But we will hear from people who have had personal sightings rather than Pentagon bureaucrats who have always been sent to stonewall our investigations. Just so that the press knows and the people know, we were even denied access to a classified briefing in a SCIF prior to this hearing due to the amount of hoops that we had to jump through to grant temporary clearance to witness Grush, who has knowledge of classified information. It is time to have an open-minded discussion on this topic, to hear the evidence and understand the magnitude of what this means, not just for our nation, but for humanity. Thank you, Chairman. I yield back the rest of my time.
Good morning and welcome to the most exciting subcommittee in Congress this week, the Subcommittee on National Security, the Border, and Foreign Affairs for discussion of unidentified anomalous phenomenon. I'd like to thank the brave military pilots and personnel, such as the witnesses on the panel today, for sharing their stories on how they have engaged UAPs, which has brought attention to this matter. Curiosity and speculation from all walks of life have generated interest in studying what UAPs are and what threats they may pose. I will say that when I was younger in school, I read a book, a 1966 book called Flying Saucers, Serious Business, and for a while, when I was a little bit younger, I thought it was the most important issue out there. The lack of transparency regarding UAPs has fueled wild speculation and debate for decades, eroding public trust in the very institutions that are meant to serve and protect them, as is evidenced by the large number of people we have here. I also want to point out in 1966, President Gerald Ford claimed to have seen a UFO, and in 1969 in Georgia, Jimmy Carter claimed to have seen a UFO. So this has led Congress to establish entities to examine UAPs. The National Defense Authorization Act of 2022 established the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, or AARO, to conduct or to coordinate efforts across the Department of Defense and other federal agencies to detect, identify, and investigate UAPs. However, AARO's budget remains classified, prohibiting meaningful oversight from Congress. In addition to AARO's efforts, NASA is leading an independent study on UAPs that will identify how UAP data is gathered from both civilian and government entities that can be analyzed to shed light on the topic. However, despite these offices being established, there lies a pressing demand for government transparency and accountability that cannot be overlooked. And that's been a problem that's been around for 50 years. The Biden administration handling of the Chinese spy balloon that violated U.S. airspace is one example how the government is not prepared for these. The Biden administration's description of events has shown that the government continues not to be forthright. Between the Chinese balloon being shot down and 2 UAPs subsequently shot down following the event earlier this year, the U.S. government spent $1.5 million in taxpayer dollars on missiles, yet we have seen little clarity from the Biden administration. We must demand transparency from the Department of Defense, our intelligence community, and our defense industry on the UAP work. We're going to ask some questions about that today. Congress recognizes the subject of UAPs as multifaceted and requires a careful, data-driven approach.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here. I want to thank everybody for making this happen today, and I want to remind everybody this is a nonpartisan issue. This has nothing to do with party politics. I think the cover-up goes a lot deeper than that. I also want to thank my colleagues, Representative Anna Paulina Luna, sitting beside me here, Jared Moskowitz, my friend across the aisle, has an incredible mind, and I'm anxious to hear his questions, my buddy Eric Burleson, and it's not in my notes here, but Matt Gaetz. If it hadn't been for Matt Gaetz, myself, him, and Luna would still be down at Eglin Air Force Base trying to get some answers. He's got an incredible legal mind. You know, Mr. Knapp wrote, since 1969, the position of our military has been that UFOs pose no threat to national security and are not worthy of further study. I'd say that's the biggest understatement of the decade. He also goes on to talk about the dismissive attitude. It's at odds with what was revealed in documents, reports, and internal memos. And Mr. Cabral says, as he writes these words, the UFO is emerging as a major topic of global importance. I can state that as a fact. Out there, I met a fellow who came in here all the way from Denmark to be here for this meeting. So this is huge. This is worldwide. I think we suspect what's going on, but I'd also like to thank the members of Congress who have supported our efforts to make this hearing happen. Some have even confided to me that they've had UFO sightings of their own. Those members, of course, some of them wish to remain anonymous, and I'll keep it that way. But also, finally, I'd like to thank these three brave witnesses here. They took an oath. They took an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States, and dadgummit, they're doing it. And we owe them a debt of gratitude. We've run into roadblocks from members from the intelligence community, the Pentagon. I proposed legislation to go in the FAA reauthorization that just said if an airline pilot has a sighting, that when he makes that report to the FAA, that it would come to Congress. But I was told that the intelligence community did not like that, and the amendment was not even heard in committee.
Now, it's really important that we're here in a bipartisan way to have this conversation, which really, to the heart of it, is about national security and key to the subcommittee's core purpose. This is the subcommittee on national security of the Oversight Committee. Now, our witnesses will testify today that UAPs have posed a serious safety threat, and we must understand this. More broadly, we're dealing with real questions that get to the heart of our faith in government. Faith in our institutions, as we all know, is at an all-time low. Partisanship and alternative facts make it too easy to doubt narrative or our institutions. But this hearing will offer the public unique perspectives, building on years of reporting by both federal agencies and the independent media. Now, some of the earliest reporting on this issue was a groundbreaking 2017 New York Times report, which revealed research, as we know now, on unidentified anomalous phenomena, or as many call UFOs, by the Defense Intelligence Agency. Mr. Graves and Commander Fravier's experiences with UAPs have also been documented by the public, not just by the New York Times, but CNN and many other national news outlets. Now, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence has published public reports documenting UAPs, and on June 9th, 2022, NASA announced that the agency is commissioning a study to, of course, examine unidentified anomalous phenomena. Now, the sheer number of reports, whistleblowers, and stories of unidentified anomalous phenomena should raise real questions and warrant investigation and oversight, and that's why we are here today. Now, pilots have reported encounters for years. Now, because of the stigma around reporting these incidents, we still don't have a complete picture of actually what's going on, particularly as our witnesses will testify on the civilian side, and that is a real problem that we have today in the country. Now, it's very important that we show that Democrats and Republicans in Congress can come together in a bipartisan way to cut through misinformation and to look at the facts in a serious and thoughtful manner. I also want to note that Mr. Sean Kirkpatrick, director of the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, the component of the DoD office that investigates UAP data, has testified before the Senate this year that his unit has found no evidence of extraterrestrial activity. NASA has also stated that they don't have evidence of extraterrestrial life either, and we've heard this, of course, from some of our government agencies. And we should remind viewers and witnesses, which I think is really important, that we also cannot share classified information in public settings. But questions, of course, remain that people want to see data and information for themselves. The enormous interest in the hearing today underscores the importance of a fair and open look at the evidence from witnesses who can share their unique perspectives.
And it's not something that is just going on in this administration. It's something that's spanned many administrations. For decades, many Americans have been fascinated by objects, mysterious and unexplained, and it's long past time that they got some answers. The American public has a right to learn about technologies of unknown origins, non-human intelligence, and unexplainable phenomena. Those are not the words of a UFO Twitter account, though that is a direct quote from Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, that the American public has a right to learn about technologies of unknown origins, non-human intelligence, and unexplainable phenomena. In an interview with Fox News, recent former Director of National Intelligence John Radcliffe confirmed the U.S. government is aware a lot more sightings of UAPs, and that they have not made that information public. I quote, "There are a lot more sightings that have not been made public," Radcliffe said to Fox News. For me, this hearing is about transparency. We unfortunately live in a time in which many people distrust government and our institutions, and overclassification of information away from the American public or even Congress contributes to today's politics. The American people have regular questions. What are UAPs? How come the media doesn't report more on them? Are they foreign adversaries? Are they U.S. technology? Are they something else? They ask themselves, how come when a Russian jet shoots flares at one of our drones, we have perfect pictures and videos to show the American people and the world, but when it comes to UAPs, nothing? Of course, we must always protect our national security to maintain our superiority, like when stealth helicopters were only rumored to exist, but were used in the Osama bin Laden raid in 2011. But we can't allow that to be used as a shield to keep the American people completely in the dark from basic truths.
Right, now I'd like to introduce our witnesses. Our first witness is Lieutenant Ryan Graves. He's the Executive Director of Americans for Safe Aerospace. Lieutenant Graves is also a former U.S. Navy F-18 pilot with his own UAP experience. The next witness, David Grush, is a former senior intelligence officer with the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency and was a senior technical advisor for UAP issues. And finally, retired Navy Commander David Fravor, squadron leader who worked as a naval aviator for 18 years. Mr. Fravor has his own UAP experience known as the Tic Tac Event. I look forward to hearing from all three of you today. Pursuant to Committee Rule 9G, the witnesses will please stand and raise their right hands. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let the record show that all the witnesses answered in the affirmative. You may be seated. We appreciate you all being here today and look forward to your testimony. I'll remind the witnesses that we have read your written statements and they will appear in full in the hearing record.
Thank you. Chairman Grothman, Ranking Member Garcia, distinguished members of the House Oversight Subcommittee on National Security, Representatives Burchett and Luna. My name is Ryan Fobbs Graves, and I am a former F-18 pilot with a decade of service in the U.S. Navy, including 2 deployments in Operation Enduring Freedom and Operation Inherent Resolve. I have experienced advanced UAP firsthand, and I'm here to voice the concerns of more than 30 commercial aircrew and military veterans who have confided their similar encounters with me. Today, I would like to highlight 3 critical issues that demand our action. As we convene here, UAP are in our airspace, but they are grossly underreported. These sightings are not rare or isolated, they are routine. Military aircrew and commercial pilots, trained observers whose lives depend on accurate identification, are frequently witnessing these phenomena. The stigma attached to UAP is real and powerful and challenges national security. It silences commercial pilots who fear professional repercussions, discourages witnesses, and is only compounded by recent government claims questioning the credibility of eyewitness testimony. Parts of our government are aware of more about UAP than they let on, but excessive classification practices keep crucial information hidden. Since 2021, all UAP videos are classified as secret or above. This level of secrecy not only impedes our understanding, but fuels speculation and mistrust. In 2014, I was an F-18 Foxtrot pilot in the Navy Fighter Attack Squadron 11, the Red Rippers, and I was stationed at NAS Oceana in Virginia Beach. After upgrades were made to our jet's radar systems, we began detecting unknown objects operating in our airspace. At first, we assumed they were radar errors, but soon we began to correlate the radar tracks with multiple onboard sensors, including infrared systems, eventually through visual ID. During a training mission in Warning Area Whiskey 72, 10 miles off the coast of Virginia Beach, two F-18 Super Hornets were split by a UAP. The object, described as a dark gray or a black cube inside of a clear sphere, came within 50 feet of the lead aircraft and was estimated to be 5 to 15 feet in diameter. The mission commander terminated the flight immediately and returned to base. Our squadron submitted a safety report, but there was no official acknowledgement of the incident and no further mechanism to report the sightings. Soon, these encounters became so frequent that aircrew would discuss the risk of UAP as part of their regular pre-flight briefs. Recognizing the need for action and answers, I founded Americans for Safe Aerospace. The organization has since become a haven for UAP witnesses who were previously unspoken due to the absence of a safe intake process. More than 30 witnesses have come forward, and almost 5,000 Americans have joined us in the fight for transparency at safeaerospace.org. The majority of witnesses are commercial pilots at major airlines. Often, they are veterans with decades of flying experience. Pilots are reporting UAP at altitudes that appear above them at 40,000 feet, potentially in low Earth orbit or in the gray zone below the Kármán line, making inexplainable maneuvers like right-hand turns and retrograde orbits or J-hooks. Sometimes these reports are reoccurring, with numerous recent sightings north of Hawaii and in the North Atlantic. Other veterans are also coming forward to us regarding UAP encounters in our airspace and oceans. The most compelling involve observations of UAP by multiple witnesses and sensor systems. I believe these accounts are only scratching the surface, and more will share their experiences once it is safe to do so. In closing, I recognize the skepticism surrounding this topic. If everyone could see the sensor and video data I witnessed, our national conversation would change. I urge us to put aside stigma and address the security and safety issue this topic represents. If UAP are foreign drones, it is an urgent national security problem. If it is something else, it is an issue for science. In either case, unidentified objects are concerned for flight safety. The American people deserve to know what is happening in our skies. It is long overdue. Thank you.
Mr. Rush.
Mr. Chairman, ranking members and congressmen, thank you. I'm happy to be here. This is an important issue, and I'm grateful for your time. My name is David Charles Grush. I was an intelligence officer for 14 years, both in the U.S. Air Force, both active duty, Air National Guard, and Reserve, at the rank of major, and most recently from 2021 to 2023, at the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, NGA, at the GS-15 civilian level, which is the military equivalent of a full bird colonel. I was my agency's co-lead in unidentified anomalous phenomena and transmedium object analysis, as well as reporting to the UAP task force, UAPTF, and eventually, once it was established, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, AARO. I became a whistleblower through a PPD-19 urgent concern filing in May 2022 with the Intelligence Community Inspector General. Following concerning reports from multiple esteemed and credentialed current and former military and intelligence community individuals that the U.S. government is operating with secrecy above congressional oversight with regards to UAPs. My testimony is based on information I've been given by individuals with a long-standing track record of legitimacy and service to this country, many of whom also have shared compelling evidence in the form of photography, official documentation, and classified oral testimony to myself and my various colleagues. I have taken every step I can to corroborate this evidence over a period of 4 years while I was with the UAP task force and do my due diligence on the individual sharing it. This is because of these steps, I believe strongly in the importance of bringing this information before you. I am driven by a commitment of both to truth and transparency, rooted in our inherent duty to uphold the United States Constitution and protect the American people. I'm asking Congress to hold our government to this standard and thoroughly investigate these claims. But as I stand here under oath now, I am speaking to the facts as I've been told them. In the U.S. Air Force, in my National Reconnaissance Office, NRO, reservist capacity, I was a member of the UAP Task Force from 2019 to 2021. I served at the NRO Operations Center on the Director's Briefing Staff, which included the coordination of the Presidential Daily Brief and supporting variety of contingency operations, which I was the Reserve Intelligence Division Chief backup. In 2019, the UAP Task Force Director asked me to identify all special access programs and controlled access programs, also known as SAPs and CAPs, we needed to satisfy our congressionally mandated mission, and we were direct report at the time to the DepSecDef. At the time, due to my extensive executive level intelligence support duties, I was cleared to literally all relevant compartments and in a position of extreme trust, both in my military and civilian capacities. I was informed in the course of my official duties of a multi-decade UAP crash retrieval and reverse engineering program, to which I was denied access to those additional read-ons when I requested it. I made the decision, based on the data I collected, to report this information to my superiors and multiple inspectors general, and in effect becoming a whistleblower. As you know, I've suffered retaliation for my decision, but I am hopeful that my actions will ultimately lead to a positive outcome of increased transparency. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer your questions.
Thank you. Commander Fravor?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Congressmen, Congresswomen. I want to first thank you for the invitation to speak to the committee on the UAP topic that has been in the news for the past 6 years and seems to be continuing to gain momentum. As you know, my name is David Fravor. I'm a retired commander in the United States Navy. In 2004, I was a commanding officer of Strike Fighter Squadron 41, the world-famous Black Aces. We were attached to Carrier Wing 11, stationed on board the USS Nimitz, and had begun a 2-month workup cycle off the coast of California. On this day, we were scheduled for a 2v2 air-to-air training with the USS Princeton as our control. When we launched off Nimitz, my wingman was joining up. We were told that the training was going to be suspended and we were going to proceed with real-world tasking. As we proceeded to the west, the air controller was counting down the range to an object that we were going to, and we were unaware of what we were going to see when we arrived. The controller had told us that these objects had been observed for over 2 weeks, coming down from over 80,000 feet, rapidly descending to 20,000 feet, hanging out for hours, and then going straight back up. For those who don't realize, above 80,000 feet is space. We arrived at the location at approximately 20,000 feet, and the controller called merge plot, which means that our radar blip was now in the same resolution cell as the contact. As we looked around, we noticed that we saw some whitewater off our right side. It's important to note that the weather on this day was as close to perfect as you could ask for off the coast of San Diego. Clear skies, light winds, calm seas, no whitecaps from waves. So the whitewater stood out in a large blue ocean. All 4 of us, because we were in F-18Fs, so we had pilots and Wizzo in the back seat, looked down saw a white Tic Tac object with a longitudinal axis pointing north-south and moving very abruptly over the water like a ping pong ball. There were no rotors, no rotor wash, or any sign of visible control surfaces like wings. As we started clockwise towards the object, my Wizzo and I decided to go down and take a closer look with the other aircraft staying in high cover to observe both us and the Tic Tac. We proceeded around the circle about 90 degrees from the start of our descent, and the object suddenly shifted its longitudinal axis, aligned it with my aircraft, and began to climb. We continued down another 270 degrees, nose low, where the Tic Tac, or we considered 270 degrees to where, and we went nose low to where the Tic Tac would have been. Our altitude at this point was about 15,000 feet, and the Tic Tac was about 12,000. As we pulled nose onto the object, within about a half mile of it, it rapidly accelerated in front of us and disappeared. Our wingmen, roughly 8,000 feet above us, lost contact also. We immediately turned back to see where the whitewater was at, and it was gone also. So as we started to turn back towards the east, the controller came up and said, "Sir, you're not going to believe this, but that thing is at your cap point, roughly 60 miles away in less than a minute." You can calculate the speed. We returned to Nimitz. We were taking off our gear. We were talking to one of my crews that was getting ready to launch. We mentioned it to them, and they went out and luckily got the video that you see, that 90-second video. What you don't see is the radar tape that was never released, and we don't know where it's at, of the active jamming that the object put on an APG-73 radar, and I can get into modes later if you're interested. What is shocking to us is that the incident was never investigated. None of my crew were ever questioned. Tapes were never taken, and after a couple days, it turned into a great story with friends. It wasn't until 2009 until Jay Stratton had contacted me to investigate. Unbeknownst to all, he was part of the ATIP program in the Pentagon led by Lou Elizondo. And there was an unofficial official report that came out that's now on the internet. Years later, I was contacted by the other pilot, Alex Dietrich, and asked if I'd been contacted, and I said no, but I'm willing to talk. I was contacted by Mr. Elizondo, and we talked for a short period of time, and he said we'd be in contact. A few weeks after that, I was made aware that Lou had left the Pentagon in protest and joined forces with Tom DeLonge, Chris Mellon, Steve Justice, and others to form Two Stars Academy, an organization that pressed the issue with leading industry experts and U.S. government officials. They worked with Leslie Keene, who is present today, Ralph Blumenthal, and Helene Cooper to publish the articles in the New York Times 2017 New York Times, and it removed the stigma on the topic of UFOs, which is why we're here today. Those articles open the door for the government and public that cannot be closed. It has led to an interest from our elected officials who are not focused on little green men, but figuring out where these craft are, where they're from, the technology they possess, how do they operate. It also led to the Whistleblower Protection Act and the NDAA. There are multiple witnesses coming forward to say that have firsthand knowledge, and Mr. Grush just covered that. What concerns me is that there's no oversight from our elected officials on anything associated with our government processing or working on craft. Believe it not from this world. This issue is not a full public disclosure that could undermine national security, but it is about ensuring that our system of checks and balances works across all work done in the government using taxpayer funds. Relative to government programs, even unacknowledged WAVE programs have some level of oversight by the appropriate committee members in the House and Senate, and this work that is said to be occurring from whistleblower testimonies should not be exempt. In closing, I would like to say that the Tic Tac object we engaged in 2004 was far superior to anything that we had on time, have today, or are looking to develop in the next 10 years. If we in fact have programs that possess this technology, it needs to have oversight from those people that the citizens of this great country elected in office to represent what is best for the United States and best for the citizens. I thank you for your time. Thank you very much.
Right now, we need a system where pilots can report without fear of losing their jobs. There is a fear that the stigma associated with this topic is going to lead to professional repercussions, either through management or perhaps through their yearly physical check. So having a secure system, reducing the stigma, and making this information available through the public is going to reduce the concerns that aircrew have.
Could you just give me a little idea of the degree to which reports in the past are not made public right now?
Well, I don't think there has been a proper reporting system to gather those reports and thus not report them. So to answer your question, I think there is a dearth of data due to the fact that the reporting has been limited up to this time.
Could you tell me why you believe it's, kind of to play the devil's advocate, a reason why some of this stuff should not be available to the public?
There's certainly some national security concerns when we use our advanced sensors in our tactical jets to be able to identify these objects. However, there's no reason that the objects themselves would be classified. I would be curious to see how the security classification guideline actually spells out the different nuances of how this topic is classified from the perspective of UAP, not national security.
I'll give you a follow-up on that. Assuming that there are reasons why not all this should be made public, this has been around for a long period of time. Can any of the three of you think of any reason why anything related to UAPs, say 15 years and back, should not be immediately made public?
I think one of it is acknowledging a vulnerability, both from a collection and I'll just say a countermeasure perspective. So it's not we haven't cracked for many years. Yeah.
Even say 20 years back. Is there any reason why, when you go back that far, things shouldn't be made public?
Unless it shows a specific national security vulnerability as it relates to a weakness in particular defense system.
A Tic Tac incident that that you were engaged occurred in 2004. What kind of reporting took place after that incident?
None. We had a standard debrief where the backseaters went down to our carrier intel center and briefed what had happened, and that was it. No one else talked to us, and I was in the top 20 in the battle group. No one came. The captain was aware, the admiral was aware, nothing was done.
Your commanding officers provide any sort of justification?
No, because I was the commanding officer of the squadron, so no.
Was this incident the only UAP event that you encountered while you were a pilot?
Yes, it was.
Okay. This is for any one of you. Based off of each of your experiences and observations, do you believe UAPs pose a potential threat to our national security?
Yes, and here's why. The technology that we faced was far superior than anything that we had, and you could put that anywhere. If you had one, you captured one, you reverse engineered it, you got it to work, you're talking something that can go into space, go someplace, drop down in a matter of seconds, do whatever it wants, and leave, and there's nothing we can do about it. Nothing.
Okay. You two?
Well, I would also like to add, from a commercial aviation and military aviation perspective, we deal with uncertainty in our operating space as a matter of our professional actions. Identifying friend from foe is very important to us. And so when we have unidentified targets and we continue to ignore those due to a stigma or a fear of what it could be, that's an opening that our adversaries can take advantage of.
Mr. Grush, in your complaint to the Intelligence Community Inspector General, you claim that you believe information is being hidden. What kind of information do you think was hidden, and do you think it should remain hidden?
Yes, I can speak to that very briefly in an unclassified manner. As you know, the preponderance of my complaint was classified to the intelligence communities. Both material acquisition and exploitation activity, also baselining the UAPs but not sharing it with intelligence professionals that are actually doing step briefs to pilots, that kind of information. Yeah.
Particularly, Mr. Graves, one of the, I think, concerns that for members of this committee is this idea that pilots, there's no system to actually report UAPs and the stigma around pilots. And so can you just briefly, you mentioned that you're working with 30 pilots right now that have had encounters with UAPs, but you've also, I believe, discussed and know of many more pilots. This is just those that you're currently working with. Is that correct? Can you expand on that?
Certainly. I'll break that down in two ways. First, when we were first experiencing these objects off the eastern seaboard in the 2014 to 2015 time period, anyone that had upgraded their radar systems were seeing these objects. So there was a large number of my colleagues that were detecting these objects off the eastern seaboard. They were further correlating that information with their other onboard sensors, and many of them also had their own eye sightings as well of these objects. Now, that was our personal first-hand experience at the time. Since then, as I've engaged this topic, others have reached out to me to share their experiences, both on the military side as well as the commercial aviation side. On the military aviation side, veterans that have recently got out have shared their stories and have expressed how the objects we were seeing in 2014, 2015 continued all the way to 2019, 2020, and beyond. And so it became a generational issue for naval aviators on the eastern seaboard. This was something we were briefing to new students. This is something that was included in the notice to airmen to ensure that there was no accidents. And now with commercial aviators, they are reaching out because they're having somewhat similar experiences as our military brothers and sisters, but they do not have any reporting system that they can send us to.
And let me just add, both to Mr. Fravor as well as Mr. Graves, not having this system for reporting, would you both agree that is harmful to not just our national security interests, but to understand this phenomenon of what's happening with UAPs?
I think it's actually a travesty that we don't have a system to correlate this and actually investigate. So if you took the East Coast, there's coastal radars out there that monitor our air defense identification zone, so out to 200 miles. They can track these, so when you see them, they could actually go and pull that data and get maneuvering. And instead of just having the airplanes, there's other data sources out there. And I've talked to other government officials on this. Of you need a centrally located repository that these reports go to. So if you just stuck it in DOD, you wouldn't get anything out of the Intelligence Committee because they have a tendency to not to talk. But if you had a central location where these reports would come in, not just military, but also commercial aviation, because there's a lot of that going on, especially if you talk to anyone that flies from here to Hawaii, over the Pacific, they see odd lights. So I think you need to develop something that allows you a central point to collect the data in order to investigate.
Mr. Graves?
I would concur with everything Mr. Fravor said. I'll continue to say that the commercial pilots that have reached out to me through Americans for Safe Aerospace are doing so because they don't feel there's another way for them to report this safety issue.
One of the things that I found fascinating in our discussion, Mr. Graves, last night as well, is that you both described UAPs and formations and the way they are observed in space or in our air, and the way that they move is essentially ways in which current technology or aircraft that we know of are unable to actually function or move. And so will you just, for the public record, again, once again, just briefly just either describe or note that aircraft that are being witnessed, particularly by the 30 folks that you're working with, are essentially outside the scope of anything that we know of today and the technology we have today. Mr. Graves, Mr. Fravor?
Yes, the objects that are being seen by commercial pilots are performing maneuvers that are unexplainable due to our current understanding of our technology and our capabilities as a country, and that applies for the military as well.
Mr. Fravor?
Yeah, I concur with that. We have nothing that can stop in midair and go the other direction, nor do we have anything that can, like in our situation, come down from space, hang out for 3 hours, and go back up.
Thank you. My last question, and sometimes I know that you have also said some of these answers in the past, but we're trying to get them on the public record as well, which is really important. Mr. Gresh, finally, do you believe that our government is in possession of UAPs?
Absolutely, based on interviewing over 40 witnesses over 4 years.
And where?
I know the exact locations, and those locations were provided to the Inspector General and some of which to the intelligence committees. I actually had the people with the firsthand knowledge provide a protected disclosure to the Inspector General.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, I would just say that I think that these questions are important questions, and I look forward to being involved in the process to get those answered. I know there'll be a lot of questions from other committee members, so I yield back.
How do you know that these were not our aircraft?
Some of the behaviors that we saw in a working area, we would see these objects being at 0.0 Mach, that's zero airspeed, over certain pieces of the ground. So what that means, just like a river, if you throw a bobber in, it's going to float downstream. These objects were staying completely stationary in Category 4 hurricane winds. These same objects would then accelerate to supersonic speeds, 1.1, 1.2 Mach, and they would do so in very erratic and quick behaviors that I don't have an explanation for.
Okay. Have you spoken to commercial and military pilots that have seen these off of our East Coast?
I have.
Mr. Fravor, I noticed that in the Tic Tac video, it's Tic Tac like the candy, not TikTok like the Chinese communist app.
That's correct.
Yes, sir. I just want to make that because my daughter corrected me on that and called me a boomer and said, "Hey, boomer." And I said, "No, baby, it's Tic Tac like the candy. You're going to have to just look it up." Mr. Fravor, what astonished you the most about the flight capabilities of these Tic Tac, very briefly?
The performance, absolute performance. It was.
And you're not aware of any other objects that anybody in the world has in this world that has those capabilities?
No, I think it's far beyond actually our material science that we currently possess.
Are you aware of any other reconnaissance platforms that have tracked or recorded the Tic Tac's maneuvers, maybe the NORAD system or any of the others?
I am not.
Okay. Mr. Grush, thank you for being here, brother. Thank you all very much. Have you faced any retaliation or reprisals for any of your testimony or anything on these lines?
Yeah, I have to be careful what I say in detail because there is an open whistleblower reprisal investigation on my behalf, and I don't want to compromise that investigation by providing anything that may help provide somebody information. But it was very brutal and very unfortunate, some of the tactics they used to hurt me both professionally and personally, to be quite frank. Yeah.
It's very unfortunate. As they say, when you're over the target, that's when they do the most firing at you. Do you have any personal knowledge of people who have been harmed or injured in efforts to cover up or conceal these extraterrestrial technology?
Yes. Personally.
Have anyone been murdered that you would that you know of or have heard of, I guess?
I have to be careful asking that question. I directed people with that knowledge to the appropriate authorities.
Maybe in a if we could get in a confidential area, a SCIF, we could talk about that. But unfortunately, we were denied access to the SCIF, and that's very unfortunate in this scenario. Mr. Fravor, Do you believe that you witnessed an additional object under the water in relation to your encounter?
I will say we did not see an object. There was something there to cause the whitewater, and when we turned around, it was gone. So there was something there that obviously moved.
Okay, it was not the same object though that you were looking at, correct?
No, we actually joked that the Tic Tac was communicating with something when we came back, and because the whitewater disappeared.
We were in another instance. We're told about the capabilities of a jamming during viewing of when there were some people chasing some of these objects. Did you experience any of that jamming or interrupting your radar or weapons system?
My crew that launched after we landed experienced significant jamming to the APG-73 radar, which was what we had on board, which is a mechanically scanned, very high-end system prior to the APG-79. And yes, it did pretty much everything you could do: range, velocity, aspect, and then it spit the lock, and the targeting pod is passive. That's what we were able to get the video on.
I'm about to run out of time, but are you aware of any of our enemies that have that capability?
No.
Okay, I would also like to note for the record that, like George Knapp, breaking Area 51, he's the reason I knew about that, and the reason I know about the Tic Tacs is Leslie Keene from New York Times article, and I would encourage everybody to read that.
My first question is, you've identified these as taking place on the East Coast. Is it just on the East Coast where these encounters have been reported?
No. Since the events initially occurred, I've learned that the objects have been detected essentially where all operations, Navy operations, are being conducted across the world. And that's from the All-Domain Anomaly Resolutions Office reporting.
All right, can you describe your experience after you decided to come forward and go public with your experience?
Certainly. Like many others, in 2017, I saw the New York Times article come out as well. And for me, it was special because I recognized the voices on the video. I recognized the video itself. I had seen it when it was taken. I'd seen it when it was debriefed. And so that was kind of shook me because I realized that this problem was still ongoing. And so I reached out to colleagues back on the East Coast and realized that this was still a safety risk that they were dealing with, that they had essentially hit a wall with how they could move forward on this conversation. It was at that point when I decided to try to move the conversation forward myself.
Are there common characteristics to the UAPs that have been cited by different pilots, and can you describe what the convergence of descriptions is?
Certainly. We were primarily seeing dark gray or black cubes inside of a clear sphere.
I'm sorry, dark gray or black cubes?
Yes, inside of a clear sphere, where the apex or tips of the cube were touching the inside of that sphere. And that was primarily what was being reported when we were able to gain a visual tally of these objects. And that occurred over almost 8 years. And as far as I know, it's still occurring.
Mr. Grush, what about you? What was your experience after you came forward?
Well, it's only been about 2 months or so, so I guess my experience has been overwhelming support from former colleagues of mine that have privately messaged me, and I do appreciate that. But I do have knowledge of active planned reprisal activity against myself and other colleagues, and it's very, very upsetting to me.
Coming from where?
Certain senior leadership at previous agencies I was associated with. And that's all I'll say publicly, but I can provide more details in a closed environment.
Okay. Well, I hope you understand that there would be bipartisan rejection of any attempt to vilify, demonize, or engage in other reprisals against our witnesses and people who are telling the truth from their perspective.
Yeah, there were certain colleagues of mine that were brutally administratively attacked, and it actually makes me very upset as a leader to see that happen to other coworkers and actually superiors of mine over the last 3 years.
How do you account for that response? That seems like a bizarre response.
I call it administrative terrorism. That's their quiver, their tool in the toolbox to silence people, especially the career government service cares about their career, cares about their clearance, their reputation to climb the ladder. And when you threaten that career path, a lot of people back off. But I'm here to represent those people. So,
Mr. Fravor, what about you? What has your experience been since you've come forward with your perspective on this?
Actually, I've been treated very well. And the 6 people that were involved, myself included, all of them have or will be retiring from the military as 05s or 06s. And all my friends that are very senior 3 and 4 stars, I've talked to them. They believe, they understand there's a problem. But no, I was actually treated really well.
And what is your general interpretation of these phenomena, or what is your current thinking of trying to make sense of them?
Well, I'll say, I'm not like a UFO fanatic. It's not me. But I will tell you that what we saw with 4 sets of eyes over a 5-minute period, still, there's nothing. We have nothing close to it. It was amazing to see. I told my buddy I wanted to fly it, but yeah, it's just an incredible technology.
In the last couple of years, have you had incidences that have caused you to be in fear for your life for addressing these issues?
Yes, personally.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just want everyone to note that he's coming forward in fear of his life. To put in perspective, if they were really not scared about this information coming out, why would someone be intimidated like that? To your knowledge, are NHIs working with adversarial foreign governments in either technology exchange programs or back engineering programs?
I don't have data on that. I'm not sure.
Have you heard or you had people come forward to present that evidence?
Not that particular evidence that you just espoused.
Okay, on the 19th of April, Dr. Kirkpatrick, head of Aero, had said that he did not find any evidence of UAPs. You also stated that you had, in your interview, that you had briefed him on information that you were uncovering, but that he did not follow up with you. Were the items that you divulged to him pertinent to national security?
Yes, him and I had a classified conversation in April 2022 before he took over Aero in July 2022, and I provided him some concerns I had.
Do you know why he might not have followed up with you?
Unfortunately, I cannot read his mind. I wish he did. I was happy to give sage counsel to him on where to look when he took the helm of Aero.
Okay, and then my last question for you before I move to Mr. Graves is you received prior approval from the Defense Department to speak on certain issues, correct?
Correct, through DOPSR, DoD Pre-Publication and Security Review, and I just want to remind the public, they're just looking from a security perspective. These are my own personal views and opinions, not the department's.
Okay, I'm asking that, though, mainly because I think that there are many people that would like to discredit you, so it does bring a certain amount of credibility to your testimony.
I'm required by law to do that as a former intelligence officer, or I go to jail for revealing classified information.
Yeah, we don't want you to go to jail. My next question would actually be for Mr. Graves. Can you please explain to me in detail the event that occurred at Vandenberg Air Force Base?
In the 2003 timeframe, a large group of Boeing contractors were operating near one of the launch facilities at Vandenberg Air Force Base when they observed a very large 100-yard sided red square approach the base from the ocean and hover at low altitude over one of the launch facilities. This object remained for about 45 seconds or so before darting off over the mountains. There was a similar event within 24 hours later in the evening. This was a morning event, I believe 8:45 in the morning. Later in the evening, post-sunset, there were reports of other sightings on base, including some aggressive behaviors. These objects were approaching some of the security guards at rapid speeds before darting off. And this is information that was received through one of the witnesses that have approached me at Americans for Safe Aerospace.
Was this documented in any official form, whether it was a police blotter?
Yes, they had official documentation and records from the event that the witness held over the years.
And I'm not going to ask you to do it right now for time reasons, but you would be able to sketch what was witnessed, correct? And have you seen that before on any other equipment and or during your flight time?
I have not seen what they've described. This object was estimated to be almost the size of a football field, and I have not seen anything personally that large.
Okay, and then another question on follow-up referencing the gimbal video Go Fast incident. Can you just clarify, because to our understanding, the footage was actually cut off at a certain point, but what happens at the end of that video, just for those Americans specifically that are wanting to know about the rest of that footage?
Certainly. There was some uncertainty or instability with the object. It seemed to rock a bit, and that's the last last I had seen of the video. Much of the data that I would recommend be analyzed would consist of radar data that would provide precise kinematics on the object, as well as the fleet of objects that were operating nearby.
Okay, and follow-up, in regards to the reporting procedures that Mr. Garcia had addressed on, as well as Representative Burchett, with the FAA, to your understanding, pilots that are seeing this, commercial airline pilots, are they receiving cease and desist letters from corporations for coming forward with information in regards to safety for potential airline passengers?
I have been made privy to conversations with commercial aviators who have received cease and desist orders.
So the American public should know that corporations are putting their own reputations on the not the line, but ahead of the safety of the American people. And I think, would you agree with that statement?
It appears so. And they were observed up to Mach 2, which is a very non-aerodynamic shape.
What about G-forces? Let's talk about G-forces of those vehicles. Could a human survive those G-forces with known technology today?
No.
No, not for the acceleration rates that we observed.
Okay. What about what they look like? How close did you get? Did you see a seam or a rivet or a section? And what I mean is, obviously, the jets you're flying have all those things. Did these objects have those?
Do you want to go, Ryan?
I didn't have the detail to be able to tell that.
So we got within a half mile of Tic Tac, which people say that's pretty far, but in airplanes, that's actually relatively close. No, it was perfectly white, smooth, no windows, although when we did take the original FLIR video that is out there, when you put it on a big screen, it actually had two little objects that came out of the bottom of it. But other than that, no windows, no seams, no nothing.
Mr. Grush, as a result of your previous government work, have you met with people with direct knowledge or have direct knowledge yourself of non-human origin craft?
Yes, I personally interviewed those individuals.
Mr. Grush, as a result of your previous government work, have you met with people with direct knowledge or have direct knowledge yourself about ATs, advanced technologies that the U.S. government has?
Based on conventional advanced tech, I was briefed to the preponderance of the Defense Department's both space and aerospace compartmented programs, yeah.
Do you have knowledge or do you have reason to believe that there are programs in the advanced tech space that are unsanctioned?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Yeah.
And when you say that they're above congressional oversight, what do you mean?
Complicated question. So there's, some, I would call it abuse here. So congressional oversight of conventional special access programs, so I'll use Title 10, so DOD as an example, right? So 10 U.S. Code Section 119 discusses congressional oversight of SAPs, discusses the DepSecDef's ability to waive congressional reporting. However, the Gang of Eight is at least supposed to be notified if a waived or waive-bigoted unacknowledged SAP is created, and that's public law.
Well, so that how does, I don't want to cut you off, but how does a program like that get funded?
I will give you generalities. I can get very specific in a closed session, but misappropriation of funds and
does that mean
self-fund.
Does that mean that there is money in the budget that is said to go to a program, but it doesn't, and it goes to something else?
Yes, I have specific knowledge of that. Yep.
Do you think U.S. corporations are overcharging for certain tech they're selling to the U.S. government, and that additional money is going to programs?
Correct, through something called IRAD.
Okay. Satellite imagery. Let's talk about satellite imagery. We have satellites all over the place, some that we're aware of and many that we're not aware of, right? We're taking pictures of everything at every point and second. Mr. Grush, are you aware, do you have direct knowledge, or have you talked to people with direct knowledge that there are satellite imagery of these events?
That was one of my primary tasks at NGA, since we process, exploit, and disseminate that kind of information. I've seen multiple cases, some of which, to my understanding, and of course I left NGA in April, so that's my information cutoff date. But I personally reviewed both what we call overhead collection and from other strategic and tactical platforms that I could not even explain prosaically. And I have a degree in physics, by the way, as well. And I am aware that you guys have not seen these reports, unfortunately. And I don't know why.
Do you have direct knowledge, or you had spoken to people with direct knowledge that this imagery applies to crash sites, crash imagery?
I can't discuss that in an open session.
Okay. Do you have any information that the U.S. government is involved in a disinformation campaign to deny the existence of certain UAPs?
I can't go beyond what I've already stated publicly in my News Nation interview because it touches other sensitivities.
Mr. Garouche, in your sworn testimony, you state that the United States government has retrieved supposedly extraterrestrial spacecraft and other UAP-related artifacts. You go so far as to state that the U.S. is in possession of, quote, non-human spacecraft, end quote, and that some of these artifacts have circulated with defense contractors. Several other former military and intelligence officials have come forward with similar allegations, albeit in non-public settings. However, Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, the director of AARO, previously testified before Congress that there has been, and I quote, no credible evidence thus far of extraterrestrial activity or of, quote, off-world technology brought to the attention of the office. To your knowledge, is that statement correct?
It's not accurate. I believe Dr. Kirkpatrick mentioned he had about 30 individuals that have come to Arrow thus far. A few of those individuals have also come to Arrow that I also interviewed,
Okay.
and I know what they provided Dr. Kirkpatrick and their team.
Okay.
I was able to evaluate
Okay,
that information.
I need to go on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In 2022, NASA announced that it was commissioning an independent study team to examine UAPs. The NASA team is comprised of scientists across different fields, as well as former astronauts and pilots. In May, the independent study team held its first public meeting, which included the perspectives from NASA senior leaders, as well as perspectives from the Department of Defense and intelligence agencies. The NASA study team is also expected to release its first report pretty soon, and I think it's safe to say that we all eagerly await its results. Mr. Graves, how might NASA's research influence the commercial industry regarding safety in UAP?
I think NASA has a big role to play as far as commercial aviation safety, and it's one of their original charges as an organization. One of the recommendations that have been put forward is to utilize their existing aviation safety reporting system to serve as a short-term fill and trusted platform for pilots that want to report on UAP. It also has built-in analytics capability and is funded by Congress.
Gotcha. And also, Mr. Graves, are there any other industries that may be influenced by the NASA research on UAPs? And if so, how so?
Well, I think there is a large swath of commercial capabilities that could be brought to bear on this topic, from space-based or ground-based sensor systems that are available open source or through commercial marketplaces. And I think NASA's work, as they work to identify and highlight specific parameters that can be found, we can take that information and promulgate this through the public sector so that we can have a more open conversation about what we're seeing.
You know, in 2020, the Department of Defense released several videos of UAPs, including Mr. Freyer's experience, U.S. Navy pilots that recorded footage. In 2021, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence released a preliminary report on UAP events. NASA Administrator Bill Nelson stated that NASA would begin to investigate these events. In fact, I sit on Science, Space, and Technology Committee, and when we were doing a hearing with the NASA Administrator Bill Nelson, I asked, why NASA needed to be fully funded, and there were many great reasons, but one of them was actually had to do with UAPs. He actually mentioned, is there life out there? I don't know. And so either way, these actions ultimately led NASA to assemble the independent study team that I mentioned earlier. Also in 2021, Harvard University stood up the Galileo project to research and examine the origins of UAP. So it seems like both, from NASA and in the higher education community, because of the work that y'all have done and people standing up, I think we're seeing some of that stigma slowly going away. Mr. Freyer, do you believe that military pilots feeling empowered to share their UAP experiences has directly impacted the scientific community's research goals on this topic?
I would say yes. I would say that, starting in 2017, when it actually came out, it took that stigma away. I mean, I've talked to multiple senators who said prior to that, if you'd have mentioned UAP, you'd have been laughed off the hill. And now we're sitting here today for a public testimony on what's actually going on. I'm hoping that this curve will be more of an exponential and we'll get more and more transparent to the level that we can.
Has the U.S. government become aware of actual evidence of extraterrestrial, otherwise unexplained forms of intelligence? And if so, when do you think this first occurred?
I like to use the term non-human. I don't like to denote origin. Keeps the aperture open, both scientifically. Right. Certainly, like I've discussed publicly previously, 1930s.
Okay. Can you give me the names and titles of the people with direct firsthand knowledge and access to some of these crash retrieval programs, and maybe which facilities, military bases the recovered material would be in? And I know a lot of Congress have talked about we're going to go to Area 51, and there's nothing there anymore anyway. It's just and we move like a glacier. And as soon as we announce it, I'm sure the moving vans would pull up. But please.
I can't discuss that publicly, but I did provide that information both to the Intel committees and the Inspector General.
And we could get that in the SCIF if we were allowed to get in a SCIF with you. Would that be probably what you would think?
Sure, if you had the appropriate accesses, yeah.
What special access programs cover this information, and how is it possible that they have evaded oversight for so long?
I do know the names. Once again, I can't discuss that publicly and how they've evaded oversight. In a closed setting, I can tell you the specific tradecraft used.
All right.
For the record, if you were me, where would you look? Titles, programs, departments, regions, if you could just name anything. And I put that as an open question to the three of you.
I'd be happy to give you that in a closed environment. I can tell you specifically.
Thank you. Commander Fravor?
And I would say, and I've told people that you have to know where to look. They're not going to divulge it to you because of the classification levels. But if you know where to look and who to talk to, which is exactly what Mr. Grush can point you, then you have them.
Okay. Mr. Graves?
I was an operator, so I was depending on folks like Mr. Grosh to do that homework.
Okay. Thank you very much. I yield back to the chair.
I'm going to take you to specific instances around the Phoenix Valley, because that's where I live. And in '97, we had the famous Phoenix Light case. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that. There were two things that went along with that, and the explanation was military training range off Luke and the Barry Goldwater Range. Do you know anything different other than the official explanation of those lights?
Only what's in the public vernacular about it. That was outside the scope of my duties.
And if we wanted to, just my question along with my colleague from New York, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, if we wanted to find out more about that, where would we go to find the files, and who would we address? And are you going to tell me we need to go to a SCIF so you can tell us in a SCIF?
I could potentially give you a vector on that. That specific case, I'm familiar with it in terms of public, but I give you a vector in a closed environment, yeah.
That would be good, thank you.
Yeah, I'm familiar with at least the UAP Task Force 2019 Security Classification Guide. I think it's fair. I did actually help author that with the
you got a bias that way then.
But I will say, I'll call it a lazy attitude about declassifying videos. I mean, I've seen some of the videos of the recent shoot down, and I saw no reason that couldn't have been released as long as they mask some data. The American people deserve to see that imagery in full motion video.
I would think, well, in my opinion, I will say things are overclassified. I know for a fact the video or the pictures that came out in the 2020 report that had the stuff off the East Coast, they were taken with an iPhone off the East Coast. A buddy of mine was one of the senior people there, and he said they were originally classified at TSSCI. And my question to him was, what's TSSCI about these? They're an iPhone literally off the vacapes. That's not TSSCI. So they're overclassified, and as soon as they do that, they go in a vault, and then you all have to look for them.
Yeah, so with the overclassification, that may be one way. Are there other ways that the DOD or intelligence agencies are keeping this information from the American people or even from Congress?
I think part of that has been not encouraging reporting. If the problem is not something that can be measured, it's not something that's going to be fixed.
At one point, you had said that there has been harmful activity or aggressive activity. Has any of the activity been aggressive, been hostile in your reports?
I know of multiple colleagues of mine that got physically injured, and the activity. And I got
by UAPs or by people within the federal government.
Both.
Okay, so there has been activity by alien or non-human technology and or beings that has caused harm to humans.
I can't get into the specifics in an open environment, but at least the activity that I personally witnessed, and I have to be very careful here because they tell you never to acknowledge tradecraft, right? So what I personally witnessed, myself and my wife, was very disturbing.
Okay. One of my constituents actually sent this next question, and I figured I'd ask it since I had the same thought. You've said that the U.S. has intact spacecraft. You said that the government has alien bodies or alien species. Have you seen the spacecraft?
I have to be careful to describe what I've seen firsthand and not in this environment, but I could answer that question behind closed doors. Yeah.
And have you seen any of the bodies?
That's something I've not witnessed myself.
Occam's razor is that these aircraft, have they been identified that they are being produced by domestic, military and contractors? Is there any evidence that that's what's being recovered?
Not to my knowledge, plus the recoveries predate a lot of our advanced programs that I previously am witting of. So,
would it be safe to say that there could be a scenario today where you have an aircraft that crashes and because it's been involved in one program from one federal agency, but the agency that retrieves it is not aware of that program, and to them it appears alien in origin?
I mean, that's a hypothetical situation. I'm not aware of any historical situation that would match that you described. So
you're not aware? It has not happened that you're aware of?
That I'm aware of.
Several months ago, my office received a protected disclosure from Eglin Air Force Base indicating that there was a UAP incident that required my attention. I sought a briefing regarding that episode and brought with me Congressman Burchett and Congresswoman Luna. We asked to see any of the evidence that had been taken by flight crew in this endeavor and to observe any radar signature as well as to meet with the flight crew. We were not afforded access to all of the flight crew. And initially, we were not afforded access to images and to radar. Thereafter, we had a bit of a discussion about how authorities flow in the United States of America, and we did see the image. And we did meet with one member of the flight crew who took the image. The image was of something that I am not able to attach to any human capability, either from the United States or from any of our adversaries. And I'm somewhat informed on the matter, having served on the Armed Services Committee for 7 years, having served on the committee that oversees DARPA and advanced technologies for several years. When we spoke with the flight crew, and when he showed us the photo that he'd taken, I asked why the video wasn't engaged, why we didn't have a FLIR system that worked. Here's what he said. They were out on a test mission that day over the Gulf of Mexico. And when you're on a test mission, you're supposed to have clear airspace. Not supposed to be anything that shows up. And they saw a sequence of 4 craft in a clear diamond formation for which there is a radar sequence that I alone have observed in the United States Congress. One of the pilots goes to check out that diamond formation and sees a large floating, what I can only describe as an orb. Again, like I said, not of any human capability that I'm aware of. And when he approached, he said that his radar went down, he said that his FLIR system malfunctioned, and that he had to manually take this image from one of the lenses, and it was not automated in collection, as you would typically see in a test mission. So I guess I'll start with Commander Fravor. How should we think about the fact that this craft that was approached by our pilot had the capability of disarming a number of the sensor and collection systems on that craft?
Well, I think this goes to that national security side, and you can go back through history of things showing up at certain areas and disabling our capabilities, which is disheartening. And for us, I mean, like I said, it completely disabled the radar in the aircraft when it tried to do it, and the only way we could see it is passively, which is how he got that image. So I think that's a concern on what are these doing, not only how do they operate, but their capabilities inside to do things like this.
And how should we think about four craft moving in a very clear formation, equidistant from one another, in a diamond? In all of the phenomenon, perhaps, Mr. Grave, that you've analyzed, have we ever seen multiple craft in a single formation?
I have one particular case, and that was during the gimbal incident. The recording on the AT FLIR system shows a single object that rotates. You hear the pilots refer to a fleet of objects that is not visible on the FLIR system, and that was something that I witnessed during the debrief as part of the radar data on the situational awareness page. I would like to add, however, Congressman, there's a small bit of anger, I would say. I would feel that those pilots are still facing that difficulty in reporting this topic, and they don't have the tools to be able to mitigate this issue. It just goes to show how serious this is and why this is such an important issue for our pilots and for our nation.
It was stated explicitly to me by these test pilots that if you have a UAP experience, the best thing you can do for your career is forget it and not tell anyone. Because any type of reporting, either above the surface or below the surface, does have a perceived consequence to these people, and that is a culture we must change if we want to get to the truth. Mr. Chairman, I would observe that perhaps as we move forward from this hearing, there are some obvious next steps. Every person watching this knows that we need to meet with Mr. Grush in a secure, compartmentalized facility so that we can get fulsome answers that do not put him in jeopardy and that give us the information we need. Second, I would suggest that the radar images that were collected of this formation of craft out of Eglin Air Force Base, and specifically the actual image taken by the actual flight crew that we can actually validate, be provided to the committee, subpoenaed if necessary, so that we're able to track how to get this type of reporting and analysis done in a more fulsome way. That would be my recommendation, humbly, as a guest here of the Fine Oversight Committee. I yield back.
You've stated that the government is in possession of potentially non-human spacecraft. Based on your experience and extensive conversations with experts, do you believe our government has made contact with intelligent extraterrestrials?
Something I can't discuss in public setting.
Okay, I can't ask when you think this occurred. If you believe we have crashed craft, stated earlier, do we have the bodies of the pilots who piloted this craft?
As I've stated publicly already in my News Nation interview, biologics came with some of these recoveries, yeah.
Were they, I guess, human or non-human biologics?
Non-human, and that was the assessment of people with direct knowledge on the program I talked to that are currently still on the program.
And was this documentary evidence, this video, photos, eyewitness? Like, how would that be determined?
The specific documentation I would have to talk to you in a skiff about.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. So, and you may or may not be able to answer my last question, and maybe we get into a skiff at the next hearing that we have, but who in the government, either what agency, sub-agency, what contractors, who should be called into the next hearing about UAPs, either in a public setting or even in a private setting? And you probably can't name names, but what agencies or organizations, contractors, et cetera, do we need to call in to get these questions answered, whether it's about funding, what programs are happening, and what's out there?
I can give you a specific cooperative and hostile witness list of specific individuals that were in those.
And how soon can we get that list?
I'm happy to provide that to you after the hearing.
Super. Thank you. And I yield back.
I serve on the National Security Subcommittee for the Financial Services Committee, so I really want to stay in the national security lane, if I may. So when we think about traditional adversaries and both us towards them and them towards us, you know, we probe their capabilities. We look for weaknesses, and we collect that data, that reconnaissance for in the event we need it in the future. For each of you, yes or no question. Based off of your own experience or the data that you've been privy to, is there any indication that these UAPs could be essentially collecting reconnaissance information? Mr. Graves?
Yes.
Mr. Grush?
Fair assessment, yeah.
Mr. Fravor?
Very possible.
Again, in the national security vein, is it possible that these UAPs would be probing our capabilities? Yes or no, Mr. Graves?
Yes.
Rush?
Yes,
Fravor?
definitely.
Is it possible that these UAPs are testing for vulnerabilities in our current systems?
Yes.
Yes, possible.
Do you feel, based off of your experience and the information that you've been privy to, that these UAPs provide an existential threat to the national security of the United States? Mr. Graves?
Potentially.
Yes, sir, potentially.
Same answer, potentially. Yeah, I'd say definitely, potentially.
Mr. Graves and Fravor, in the event that your encounters had become hostile, would you have had the capability to defend yourself, your crew, your aircraft?
Absolutely not.
Sir?
No.
Is based off of the information that you've been privy to, is there any indication that these UAPs are interested in our nuclear technology and capabilities?
Yes.
By external observation, sure, that could be a fair assessment, yeah. Yes.
Is there any indication that the Department of Energy is involved in UAP data collection and housing?
I don't have an answer.
I can't confirm or deny that in a public setting.
And could you do it in a secure setting?
Yes.
Mr. Fravor?
No, I don't know.
Mr. Chairman, I think I'm the last member to go, but there clearly is a threat to the national security of the United States of America. As members of Congress, we have a responsibility to maintain oversight and be aware of these activities so that, if appropriate, we take action. I would encourage the chairman to demand that we have any and all, but in particular Mr. Grush, talk to us in a skiff. And if that access is denied, I will personally volunteer to initiate the Holman Rule against any personnel or any program or any agency that denies access to Congress.
Are you aware of any individuals that are participating in reverse engineering programs for non-terrestrial craft?
Personally, yes.
Do you know any that would be willing to testify if there were protections for them?
Certainly closed door and assurances that breaking their NDA, they're not going to get administratively punished for so. Yeah.
I yield, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And then my last question with 51 seconds remaining. You mentioned white-collar crimes potentially being taking place in regards to a cover-up. Can you please elaborate?
I have concerns based on the interviews I conducted under my official duties of potential violations of the federal acquisition regulations, the FAR.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I yield the remainder of my time.
The two aircraft flew within about 50 feet of the object, and that was a very close visual sighting.
And you were in one of the aircraft?
I was not. I was there when the pilot landed. He canceled the mission after, and I was there. He was in the ready room with all his gear on, with his mouth open, and I asked him what the problem was, and he said he almost hit one of those darn things.
He said he was 50 feet away from it?
Yes, sir.
And his description of the object was consistent with the description you gave us before?
A dark gray or a black cube inside of a clear sphere.
Inside of a clear sphere?
Yes.
And with no self-evident propulsion system?
No wings, no IR energy coming off of the vehicle, nothing tethering it to the ground. And that was primarily what we were experiencing out there.
I'm over time. Thank you very much for your service, and I yield back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Very good. Mr. Burchett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is for all three of y'all, starting with Mr. Graves. Why did you come forward on this issue?
I came forward because I felt that my colleagues did not have a way to mitigate this safety threat, and I wanted to help them. I was trained as an aviation safety officer by the Navy, and it just felt right. I felt like I had to help the folks that were still flying and dealing with this.
Mr. Grush.
Purely a sense of duty. My first sworn oath when I was a cadet 18 years ago, and I still uphold that even out of the uniform.
Commander.
I was pestered by a friend, and I asked why, and he said, "You're the one person that they can't discredit, and you'll add credibility to the New York Times article." And so after about 6 times, I said, okay.
There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. My gosh. They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west. Look at that thing, dude. That's not our LNS though, is it? It's not. That is the LNS, dude. Well, if there's like... Look at that thing. It's rotating. Nickel 6-1 Tango, Roger, oh, got it! Woohoo! Roger, there's troubleshooting back here. Did you box moving target? No, I took an auto track. Oh, okay. Oh my gosh, dude. Wow, look at that.
The U.S. intelligence community on Friday released a long-awaited report on what it knows about UFOs, or unidentified flying objects. Some of the more than 100 instances it studied could be explained by atmospheric occurrences, foreign adversary actions, or other phenomena. But most of the incidents defied explanation. One person who knows that well is retired Lieutenant Commander Alex Dietrich, a retired Navy fighter pilot. Alex Dietrich, welcome to the NewsHour. So tell us what you saw back in a training mission in San Diego.
So in November of 2004, off the coast of Southern California, we were preparing for our deployment, running training exercises, and when we launched, anticipating going to a particular airspace and running these training exercises, we were interrupted for a real-world intercept. We were vectored to try to get a visual tally on something that another ship in our carrier strike group was picking up on their radar. So we followed their vectors, and we ended up getting a visual contact. There were 4 aircrew and 2 aircraft. So each aircraft is a cockpit with a pilot and a weapons systems officer. And so among the 4 of us, we picked up this visual tally on this UAP, this unidentified aerial phenomenon.
And what did it look like?
So we describe it as looking like a Tic Tac. It looks like the little breath mint in larger scale, but white, oblong, no apparent flight control surfaces, no apparent visible means of propulsion, and it was maneuvering in a way that we didn't recognize, that we couldn't classify, we couldn't identify.
And what do you think it is, looking back?
Oh, I'm not qualified to make that analysis. It's almost 17 years now, and I know there are a lot of folks who are curious and concerned about it, but I gave my debrief, gave what I could in terms of the information and data from that day, and I'll leave it up to the expert analysts to do their job and make that determination.
The report uses this language that there are UAPs who, quote, appeared to remain stationary in winds aloft, move against the wind, move abruptly, or move at considerable speed without discernible means of propulsion. Does that sound about like what you saw?
So I can't speak to what the winds were on that particular day. I don't know that we noted them, but it certainly did behave in a way, maneuvered in a way that we couldn't explain, and we couldn't anticipate its next move. So normally when you're looking at another aircraft, we do a lot of BFM or aerial combat maneuvering, where we are looking at turn circles or turn radius and anticipating the next move of our adversary, or if we're scrimmaging with each other. And in this particular case, it just broke the mold and kind of blew our minds in terms of the way it was maneuvering.
The report talks about how maybe the number of people reporting these incidents is actually low because there was a stigma attached to reporting. Did you ever experience that? Was there a stigma when you reported, and/or did people respond to you strangely when you talked about it?
Sure. So I don't consider myself to be a whistleblower, and I don't, the media has been calling me and asking me to do these interviews, and as a military officer, I feel that I have a duty and an obligation to respond to those citizens who are curious and concerned about this issue. But if there is something that comes of this, I hope that it's a reduction in stigma, and that folks who do encounter something, whether it's in our airspace or in our waters, near a military exercise or just off of our coast, that folks will be encouraged to report and to report up through the official channels, to actually do a thorough observation and capture it if they can on film or on video, and again to relay that up so that those who are qualified and authorized to do that analysis can put the pieces together and maybe solve the puzzle.
Alex Dietrich, thanks for taking the time during your cross-country move and talking to us from the car.
Yeah, thanks for taking this seriously.
Thanks so much.
Hello, good morning, and welcome. My name is Dan Evans, and as the designated federal official for NASA's Unidentified Anomalous Phenomena Independent Study Team, I'd like to call this meeting to order and introduce the panelists. In the back row, we have Nadia Drake, Paula Bontempi, Federica Bianco, David Grinspoon, Carlin Toner, Josh Sameta, and Jennifer Buss. While in the front row, we have Walter Scott, Warren Randolph, Reggie Brothers, Shelley Wright, Scott Kelly, Anna Maria Barea, Mike Gold, and David Spergel, who serves as chair of the team. I have a few opening remarks, but to begin, I'd like to start with the following. First, I'd like to pay tribute to the life of retired Air Force Master Sergeant Sam Sato, who's being laid to rest at Arlington National Cemetery today. Following his active duty service, Sam served as the Intelligence Collection Manager for the National Intelligence Manager for Aviation, where he played a critical role in UAP analysis. All of us at NASA offer our condolences to Sam's family, friends, and colleagues. Second, I'd like to take this opportunity to express my profound gratitude to our distinguished panel of experts for their unwavering commitment and dedication. It's disheartening to note that several of them have been subjected to online abuse due to their decision to participate on this panel. And NASA's security team is actively addressing this issue. We at NASA are acutely aware of the considerable public interest in UAP. However, it's critical to understand that any form of harassment towards our panelists only serves to detract from the scientific process, which requires an environment of respect and openness. Now, every member of our team is a recognized authority in their respective field, and they have our unequivocal support. NASA stands in solidarity with them, advocating for a respectful discourse that befits their expertise and the significance of their work. Thanks. Now, in recent years, the subject of unidentified aerial phenomena, nowadays termed unidentified anomalous phenomena, or UAPs, has captured the attention of the public, the scientific community, and the government alike. And it's now our collective responsibility to investigate these occurrences with the rigorous scientific scrutiny that they deserve. NASA Administrator Senator Bill Nelson believes that understanding UAPs is vital for several reasons, which is why he directed this study. First and foremost, it provides an opportunity for us to expand our understanding of the world around us. As an organization dedicated to exploring the unknown, this work is in our DNA. Secondly, this study aims to enhance situational awareness. The presence of UAPs raises concerns about the safety of our skies, and it's this nation's obligation to determine whether these phenomena pose any potential risks to airspace safety. By understanding the nature of UAPs, we can ensure that our skies remain a safe space for all. As an organization dedicated to the pursuit of knowledge, it is NASA's responsibility to be honest and forthright and to follow the science. And by being transparent in our work, we uphold our dedication to scientific excellence. The meeting today represents the first deliberative actions that the team has taken. And so it's important to keep in mind that they still have several months of work ahead of them. Their final report will be released this summer, and we will publish it on our website. NASA believes that the study of unidentified anomalous phenomena represents an exciting step forward in our quest to uncover the mysteries of the world around us. By embracing a scientific lens, we ensure that our work is rigorous and reliable. And by valuing transparency and openness, we can foster trust and collaboration with the public. Simply put, this is why we do what we do.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you to all the members of NASA's UAP Independent Study Team. Your selfless dedication to the pursuit of knowledge is just so commendable. And I want to thank you, the audience, for tuning in today to watch our first deliberative meeting of NASA's Independent Study Team on evaluating and categorizing unidentified anomalous phenomena. Before I begin, though, I really do want to double down on Dan's words, that it is really disheartening to hear of the harassment that our panelists have faced online, all because they're studying this topic. NASA stands behind our panelists, and we do not tolerate abuse. Harassment only leads to further stigmatization of the UAP field, significantly hindering the scientific progress and discouraging others to study this important subject matter. Your harassment also obstructs the public's right to knowledge. Our panelists are leading experts in the scientific, aeronautics, and data analytics communities. We are very lucky to have them on board to share their invaluable insights to inform NASA on what possible data could be collected in the future and how it can be collected to help us better understand the nature of UAP. The UAP Independent Study was commissioned to create a roadmap on how to use the tools of science to evaluate and categorize the nature of UAPs going forward. This roadmap, of course, will help the federal government obtain usable data to explain the nature of future UAPs. Transparency, openness, and scientific integrity are pinnacle to NASA's mission. They're at the forefront of this public meeting and have been throughout the team's 7 months on this study. As Dan noted, this is a working meeting, and so the public will have the incredible opportunity to witness the process of science in action. At NASA, we lead the world in exploration and are committed to rigorous scientific inquiry. The nature of science is to better understand the unknown, and to do that, our scientists need data. Right now, there is very limited number of high-quality observations and data curation of UAP. The existing data available from eyewitness reports are often muddled and cannot provide conclusive evidence that supports UAP recognition and analysis. Additionally, an object's background can complicate the data further and render it unusable due to conventional objects that can mimic or overshadow the phenomena completely, such as commercial aircraft, military equipment, the weather, and ionospheric phenomena like auroras. This lack of high-quality data make it impossible to draw scientific conclusions on the nature of UAP. Now, this team has used unclassified data from civilian government entities, commercial data, and data from other sources to inform their recommendations. And as Dan noted, they will be published in a public report that comes out this summer. I want to emphasize that there is really great benefit to studying unclassified data rather than classified data for this study. First, unidentified anomalous phenomena sightings themselves are not classified. It's often the sensor platform that is classified. And you can kind of think of it, if a fighter jet took a picture of the Statue of Liberty, then that image would be classified, not because of the subject in the picture, but because of the sensors on the plane. Second, unclassified data make it possible for our team to communicate openly to advance our understanding of UAP, not only with each other, but across the scientific community and to the public. This ensures a clear and transparent pipeline of information that can be built upon through generations to expand our understanding. This study relies on open data. Everything we use at NASA is open, and anyone can look at these records. So I invite you to visit our open data portal at data.nasa.gov to comb through our tens of thousands of data sets that are free and fully accessible to the public. Additionally, please check out data.gov/open/data for a great overview of where you can find the archives for our science and mission data sites. I am very, very much looking forward to hearing the deliberations put forth today from our distinguished panel of experts. Thank you so much for being here.
And, as Dr. Fox emphasized, the Defense and Intelligence Agency data on UAP are often classified primarily because of how the data is collected, not because what's in the data. If a camera on an F-35 took a picture of a bird, it's classified. If a spy satellite takes an image of a balloon, and we've had in the news some balloons recently, that data is classified. And that's because of a desire to not reveal our technical capabilities to other nations. NASA, on the other hand, operates in a mode where it's collecting data in the open. And the NASA data is available on websites and is well characterized. And because of NASA being the civilian agency studying air and space, it has a special role to play. And I see our charge primarily as helping identify for NASA ways it could play that role and contribute to understanding. We've gone through a preliminary data collection stage, and to summarize some of the things that we've learned, the current data collection efforts regarding UAPs are unsystematic and fragmented across various agencies, often using instruments uncalibrated for scientific data collection. And if I think about the data that people have out there, it's in many ways what we'd like to think of as citizen science, but again, it is uncalibrated data, poorly characterized, not well curated. And we face, looking through this data, a significant background, a background of many of these events are commercial aircraft, civilian and military drones, weather and research balloons, military equipment, ionospheric phenomenon. We need to characterize how, when the data is taken, when it sees events like this first. The current existing data and eyewitness reports alone are insufficient to provide conclusive evidence about the nature and origin of every UAP event. They're often uninformative due to lack of quality control and data curation. To understand UAP better, targeted data collection, thorough data curation, and robust analyses are needed. Such an approach will help to discern unexplained UAP sightings, but even then, there's no guarantee that all sightings will be explained. Another challenge in this area is what we call stigma. There's a real stigma among people reporting events. And despite NASA's extensive efforts to reduce this stigma, the origin of the UAPs remain unclear, and we feel many events remain unreported. Commercial pilots, for example, are very reluctant to report anomalies, and one of our goals in having NASA play a role is to remove stigma and get high-quality data.
NASA brings unique capabilities, world-class scientists, and a wealth of academic and research linkages. NASA also has access to Earth sensing satellites, radiological sensors, tools for gravitational wave, geomagnetic wave detection, and means for analyzing open source and crowdsourced data that may assist both Aero and NASA in their UAP efforts. We are very grateful for the partnership and welcome the opportunity to join with NASA to share our collective findings with the public as the U.S. government moves towards greater transparency on this issue. Last month, I testified before members of the Senate Armed Services Committee on emerging threats and capabilities and shared some of the progress made since Aero's establishment in July 2022. I discussed Aero's scientific and analytic approaches, its efforts to improve UAP data collection, standardize our reporting processes, leverage our partnerships, and meticulously review the U.S. government's UAP-related historical records. As I told the subcommittee then, the resolution of all UAP cases cannot be accomplished by DoD and the intelligence community alone. Aero's ultimate success will require partnerships with the interagency, industry, academia, the scientific community, and the public, which all bring their own resources, ideas, and expertise to the UAP challenge. We believe robust collaboration and peer review across a broad range of partners will promote greater objectivity and transparency in the study of UAP. Of course, NASA's UAP independent study team was convened very much in that spirit. I also emphasized to Congress that only a very small percentage of UAP reports display signatures that could reasonably be described as anomalous. The majority of unidentified objects reported to AARO and in our holdings demonstrate mundane characteristics of readily explainable sources. While a large number of cases in AARO's holdings remain technically unresolved, this is primarily due to a lack of data associated with those cases, very much along the lines of what David was just speaking about. Without sufficient data, we are unable to reach defendable conclusions that meet the high scientific standards we set for resolution. Meanwhile, for the few objects that do demonstrate potentially anomalous characteristics, AARO is approaching these cases with the highest level of objectivity and analytic rigor. This includes physical testing and employing modeling and simulation to validate our analyses and the underlying theories, and then peer reviewing those results before reaching any conclusions. AARO has shared these cases with the appropriately cleared NASA team members in order to discuss and help recommend potential scientific areas of study that NASA may want to take lead on. I'll underscore here, as I did before Congress, that AARO's work will take time if we are committed to doing it right. AARO is committed to the highest standards of scientific research integrity, as we know our partners at NASA are as well.
An area that comes to mind is fast radio bursts. And the Shaw Prize was just announced yesterday and awarded to the discovery of fast radio bursts. And these are these bursting signals that go off all over in space. And it's an interesting story because some of the bursts were real and are fascinating, and some of the bursts, there was a series of bursts observed by this observatory in Australia, and they had really strange structure, and people couldn't figure out what was going on. And then they started to notice a lot of them bunched together around lunchtime. And what had happened was the people at the observatory would heat up their lunch in the microwave. And something they would do is they would open the door of the microwave oven before the microwave stopped. This is bad for your microwave oven. It wears it out. But not only that, it produced a burst of radio signal that was picked up by these sensitive detectors. So this, I think, is an interesting lesson. Some events end up being something unusual and conventional, but some events with these FRBs turn out to be these powerful explosions which are taking place at cosmological distances. Their nature is still not fully understood. I think they're one of the really most fascinating objects we have, these bursts going out all over space. They're interesting probes because they're kind of lighting up space between here and there. And they're a subject of very active research. And if one looks at the history of these FRBs, at first they were discovered, not believed, then finally confirmed, and they were discovered by instruments that were very sensitive but not optimized for this. And now what we're doing is we're optimizing instruments and optimizing software to look for these events. And it's often these surprises that turn out to be most interesting. And there are phenomena like sprites, which you can think of as upward going lightning, which were seen by commercial pilots and somewhat not believed, right? Because they were very strange. And it was really only when we were able to take very high-speed imaging data, data taken often from places like space station, that we were able to see that and learn about these fascinating ionospheric phenomena. So it's surprises are really interesting. I mean, I think this is one of the fascinating things about the UAP phenomenon. If it's something that's anomalous, that makes it interesting and worthy of study.
Thanks again to NASA for hosting this public forum for UAP discussion and information exchange. And I'd like to turn to a brief presentation that includes some recently declassified footage and trends for discussion. So some of you probably saw a version of this at the open hearing last month. This is an overall review of all of the analytic trends of all the cases that we have to date. While the numbers may have changed a little bit, the overall trends remain the same. Most of what we are seeing reported by aircraft are at the altitudes where we fly aircraft. That should not be a surprise. You will note, however, that I have no space reports and I have no maritime reports. That is notable, even though we are looking across all of those domains. On the upper right, we have UAP morphologies. The vast majority of what has been reported and what we have data on, a little less than half now, are orbs, round spheres. And in the bottom right, you will see in the heat map of the areas where we get most of our reporting. This is very much a collection biased map. This is where our sensors are, our military and our IC and some of the FAA data. In the middle, it is what we call our typical UAP characteristics for the vast majority of the cases that we see. One way of looking at that is we'll call it a target package. This is the thing we are out hunting for in most cases. Next slide, please. This is an example of one that I showed at the hearing recently. This is a spherical orb, metallic, in the Middle East, 2022, by an MQ-9. I will come back to the sensor question that David raised here in a moment. This is a typical example of the thing that we see most of. We see these all over the world, and we see these in making very interesting apparent maneuvers. This one in particular, however, I would point out, demonstrated no enigmatic technical capabilities and was no threat to airborne safety. While we are still looking at it, I don't have any more data other than that. And so being able to come to some conclusion is going to take time until we can get better resolved data on similar objects that we can then do a larger analysis on. Next slide, please. I'm going to let this play through. This is a newly released video. You'll notice there are two dots moving back and forth. There is a plane at the bottom that's moving across the screen, and now there are three dots moving back and forth. The moving back and forth is from the sensor and the platform that's collecting it. This is a P3 on a training mission in the Western United States. They picked these up and they tried to intercept and was unable to intercept them. Apart from that motion, and you'll see a little bit of defocusing from the sensor itself, there is no other oddity about this, except for the fact that they couldn't catch them. The reason they couldn't catch them is because after further analysis, it was shown that those objects were actually much farther away from the P3 than they thought. And in fact, when we went even deeper, looked at air traffic control data, we were able to match those to aircraft on a major flight corridor heading into a major airport for landing. This is the kind of thing that can spoof and or provide misperception of both very highly trained pilots as well as sensors, right? And this was reported as an odd grouping of 3 UAP. All right. That is not to say that the pilots didn't know what they were looking at, or they knew what they were looking at, but they weren't really sure. But it also is meant to say that when they're not sure, they're reporting it now. And that's what they're supposed to be doing. And then we have to go look at it. Next slide, please. That brings us to really what is Aero doing in the science and technical realm. So this is one of those areas that I'm going to expound a little bit more on than we did in the last hearings. Arrow has a robust scientific plan that we are required to then provide to Congress here pretty soon. One of the first things that we're doing is looking across all the existing sensor data against that typical UAP target that I gave you up at the very first slide. That goes beyond DoD and IC sensors. That's commercial, that's civil, that's and with partnership with NASA sensors and NOAA sensors. Understanding if any of these Earth sensing satellites, any of these airborne platforms, any of these ground radars, whether it's FAA or other, can actually see these things, given what we've got so far, is going to be an important first step to understanding which sensors are going to be relevant. From there, we are augmenting with dedicated sensors that we've purpose-built, designed to detect, track, and characterize those particular objects. We will be then putting those out in very select areas for surveillance purposes. Partnerships with academia, exploring the signatures to match to our data, so understanding if a thing is moving and if it is doing certain anomalous activities, what are the signatures we would expect to see? How do we pull on that? And then from there, how do I tune my collection architecture to go after it? Statistical analytic techniques. We're working with a couple of universities on how do I do broader-based statistical analysis on unclassified and classified data so that I can apply those analytics to our holdings. And then AI and ML analytic techniques for searching out through the data what are the objects, what are the targets that we're going after. We have partnerships with both DoD and DOE labs to explore our current state-of-the-art fundamental physics of UAP observations, both current and historical. In other words, if I have objects, those few that are doing some things that are anomalous, what is our current understanding of maneuverability, speed, signature management, propulsion? What are those underlying signatures that we would expect to see, and how do I then pull on that? Our interagency and allied partnerships for calibration of our capabilities. This is exactly what David was pointing at. A vast majority of what we have reported to us are DoD sensors. DoD sensors are not scientific sensors. They are not intelligence community sensors. Believe it or not, intelligence community sensors are very close to scientific sensors. They are calibrated, they are high precision, they are everything you'd ever want to know about a thing. DoD sensors have one purpose. They are to identify an object that is known and put a weapon on it. That is what they're for, right, predominantly. So understanding how do you calibrate those against these known objects? How do I fly an F-35 against a weather balloon at different speeds and different altitudes and different sun conditions and different lighting conditions and heating conditions? Those are all important measurements that need to be done, and we are in process of doing that right now. That table on the right is a very simplified version of our entire test matrix, which you would not be able to fit on 3 of these slides against all of our sensors across all of those phenomenologies. That will be useful in order to then train our operators, pilots, and sensors against the known objects. And then finally, our pattern of life analysis. This is essentially baselining what is normal. I have all these hotspot areas, but we only have hotspot areas because that's when the reports come in from the operators that are operating at that time. They don't operate all the time. So to have a 24/7 collection monitoring campaign in some of these areas for 3 months at a time is going to be necessary in order to measure out what is normal. Then I'll know what is not normal. Right, when we have additional things that come through those spaces. And that includes space and maritime.
Hey, Sean, thanks for the briefing. Question. We talked a lot about data already. Let's talk about sensors for a second. So you mentioned that you work with labs, academia. Do you see a need to go beyond what you mentioned earlier? That is the type of sensors we have right now, which are based on national security threats and certain phenomenologies and frequency ranges, these kinds of things. Do you see a reason of going beyond that?
Yep,
And if
absolutely.
So, what are some of the challenges you see there, materials or what have you?
So can we go back to the front slide, just the first slide where the target characterization is? So we've purpose-built a couple of sensors to do search across that. Nope, down one. There you go. That's great. To go down some of those characteristics to see if we can find them correlated to pilot reporting. All right. Some of those are initially, this is going to be, I'm going to say this is a bootstrap method, right? We're doing a broad spectrum search across very few indicators that we can point to that will enable us to get a little bit more data, refine that, narrow those sensors, and go from there. So we aren't just relying on the DoD and IC sensors that exist today, because frankly, they don't point to where we want them to point. Right? I mean, I'll be frank with everyone. We can point the largest collection apparatus in the entire globe at any point we want. You just have to tell me where I want to point it. The second piece of that is a lot of what we have is around the continental United States. Most people, including the government, don't like it when I point our entire collection apparatus to your backyard, right? It's not allowed. We have some laws about that, and we've got to figure out how to do this only in the areas that I can get high confidence there's going to be something there, and high confidence I'm not going to break any laws doing it. Right? So there's a trade there. So some of these ground-based point detectors are going to be necessary for that, to point up, to point out, to search. Coupled with, we're evaluating a number of sensor opportunities across different organizations, academia, industry, whatnot, that already exist or are being built for similar purposes, or maybe other purposes that I might be able to recalibrate for this and see if those will have a chance of seeing that target. Right? So that's where the modeling and sim comes in. Can I take that target, put it into your sensor, and have a chance of seeing it? If I can, then I might want to use that.
Thanks, Sean. I have the questions you probably don't want, which are about numbers, unless I missed them during your presentation. You had said that only a very small percentage of your cases display signatures that could be anomalous, and then followed that up with the few objects that do demonstrate potentially anomalous characteristics. What numbers are we talking about? How big is your database? How many years was it collected over? And were those observations made? And then by few, what do you mean?
Right. No, that's a great question. So this chart, as I mentioned, we've updated with our current data holdings. At the time of my open hearing, we were at 650 cases-ish. We are now over 800. We are putting together our annual report, which will be due August 1 to the Hill. And in it, and there will be an unclassified version, as there always has been, we will have those updated numbers at that time. We roughly get, I mean, you can do the math, you know, it depends anywhere from 50 to 100-ish new reports a month. Now, the reason we had such a big jump recently is because I got FAA's data integrated in finally, and so we ended up with like 100 and some odd new cases. So there's reason why it's going to fluctuate. The numbers that I would say, so we're gonna try to do a little more fidelity on some of the analytics when we report out. But the numbers I would say that we see are possibly really anomalous are less than single-digit percentages of that total database. So maybe 2 to 5-ish%. Wait.
Who's next?
Is this on? Hi.
All right.
I'll stand up because
I'm
I'm
gonna
on
get
the
to
other end of the room. Thanks, Sean, for your presentation and for some of the video footage that we saw. While we're all good scientists on this panel, I think that I look at it with an untrained eye of looking at that video. And so I see 3 spots moving, and everything else in the background looks like it's stable. Can you talk a little bit more about either the sensor platform or what we're seeing that's stable in the background? Because they've been identified as airplanes, and there's clear description of from other data sources that came in to help clarify that. But when I look at this, what are all of the white spots in the background that we're seeing that are stable?
So those are that's a star background. Pretty sure that's a star background. Now, so you're looking at those planes were roughly 30 to 40-ish miles away, if I remember correctly. And when you see that smaller plane that comes in at the bottom, that one was much, much closer. It was like maybe 6 to 10 miles away, right? And so the jitter in the sensor is what you're looking at.
Right, okay, so the 3 spots, because they look like they're moving at about the same...
Right, they are.
Right, and if they were flying together, but they're not, is what I'm hearing. This is the sensor moving.
They're in a flight line.
Right.
So they're equally spaced in a flight line, and the sensor is jittering.
Thank you.
Yes.
Appreciate that.
Yes. Wait. Walter's been waiting.
Patiently waiting. Okay, if you go to your first slide, if you don't mind, not the title slide, but the one
trends
that had
slide,
the trends.
please.
Yeah, it's the previous slide.
There you go. Thank you.
So I want to make sure I understand the slide. It says typically reported characteristics, and there are a bunch of things here, like, for example, size, altitude, speed. If it's being observed from a single sensor, use the example of like the airplanes that were coming in. And if you don't know how far away they are, how do you assess the size?
Correct.
How do you assess the speed? This is what people would report, but it isn't necessarily,
What
for
is
example,
real.
the size of the object or the speed or any of the rest of it. Do I understand that correctly?
Partially.
Okay.
So this is not all single sensor observations. Some of these are very much multi-sensor observations.
Okay.
And this is parameterized to cover the range of things for any given parameter, the range of what's possible and what has been observed.
Okay. And then on the next slide, the one where you've got the,
Orb.
whatever it is, the meatball moving across the screen.
Right, that one.
So was there any look at sensor artifact, data processing artifact? I mean, the first thing that, whenever I see anything that's anomalous, I look at how was the data collected.
Yeah. So yes, these are so this is an EO sensor on an MQ-9, and we understand that very, very well. So that is a real object. Absolutely.
Hello, and welcome back from lunch, everybody, and a welcome to those of you watching us virtually. I'm Nadia. I am a scientist by training. I'm also a science journalist now, and my job is to try and synthesize the information that we've learned so far and summarize the situation. So, if you will, put together a framework for thinking about UAP. Now, I'm going to try and do this in a way that reflects the thoughts of the entire panel, although obviously we have a variety of opinions and ideas among us. So I'd like to leave some time at the end for you to weigh in with disagreements or concurrences as needed. So first, a housekeeping matter. The definition of UAP changed during the 7 months of our fact-finding process. UAP initially stood for unidentified aerial phenomena, with aerial referring to events occurring in Earth's atmosphere. That A is now defined as anomalous, which includes the space, air, and undersea domains. As a panel, I think we have decided to continue focusing our recommendations on the aerial domain, because that is where the majority of sightings and events have occurred, and also because we couldn't fully pivot to address the expanded scope of the new acronym. Beyond that, there are 3 points I want to make. The first is that for a number of reasons, UAP are obviously quite interesting, right? That is why we are here. Recently, many credible witnesses have reported seeing unidentified objects in the sky, some of which are behaving rather peculiarly. In some instances, these reports include corroborating data from various instruments, various sensors. The challenge that we have is that the data needed to explain these anomalous sightings often do not exist or are incomplete for generating a conclusive analysis. This includes eyewitness reports, which on their own can be interesting and compelling, but often lack the information needed to make definitive conclusions about an object's provenance. We as a panel are thinking about the types of data that might add value to those reports and which could be useful on their own. As a corollary, to date, in the refereed scientific literature, there is no conclusive evidence suggesting an extraterrestrial origin for UAP. Collecting more good data for the scientific community to review in a peer-reviewed context will be important for progress to be made here. The second point, UAP offer an excellent opportunity to demonstrate the power of the scientific method and of empirically addressing a question using a multidisciplinary approach. It is our job as a panel to make some recommendations about how NASA might go about tackling this topic scientifically, taking advantage of the agency's resources, global outreach, and reputation. Key points to keep in mind here are that science is hypothesis-driven. Scientists build confidence in their theories by relying on well-calibrated, well-collected data, using well-established methods with rigorous evaluation and independent corroboration. In science, skepticism is not a bias, nor is it a bad word. It is not our job to define nature, but to study it in ways that let nature reveal itself to us, regardless of how exciting or disappointing that reality might be. And to that end, when we're thinking about making recommendations about how NASA can tackle this topic scientifically, I think it's important to remember that it's not NASA's job to replicate the efforts of the Department of Defense, but rather to consider approaches that are complementary to what the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office is doing. And so one of the questions that we as a panel, I think, need to center is, what can we recommend that NASA can do that the DoD cannot? Third point, to that end, what are we even looking for? How are we defining this problem? And how do the available data define what seems to be, to borrow a cliche, a very slender needle in a very big haystack? We heard a little bit about that today from Dr. Kirkpatrick, who reported that there have been 800 events collected over about 27 years. And between 2% and 5% of those events display signatures that could be anomalous, defined as anything that is not readily understandable by the operator or the sensor, something that is doing something weird. Mr. Free and some of the experts on our panel have defined the background on which those events exist, the amount of stuff in the sky at any given time, like so. On average, FAA air traffic control handles 45,000 flights per day in US airspace, with 5,400 aircraft in the sky at peak time. Worldwide, on average, there are about 1,600 weather balloon launches per day. In the US, there are at least 184 of those balloons launched, and that doesn't include private companies or research flights. There are about 1.69 million recreational or model small uncrewed aircraft systems, and an additional 880,000 drones are registered for commercial use. And these are not controlled by air traffic control, and they are not scheduled flights. So that's our challenge. So when making recommendations as a panel, I think we need to look at what kind of imprint we want to leave. What does the situation look like 5 years from now? What does it look like 10 years from now? Why are we making these recommendations? We heard a little bit about this morning from both Mike and David, who noted that many discoveries in science are rooted in initially unexplained and bizarre phenomena. So by carefully scrutinizing the sky, or however we end up defining our search space, and by collaborating across disciplines, we are likely to learn new things about our planet. That's a fact. And that's the commensal science case we might want to consider when making recommendations here.
I mean, I think anomalous, people often think about it as going down, including ocean. but I think what's very relevant for NASA is going out, right? And, looking at things in our solar system. And I think in some sense, I think there's certain responsibilities in, when we look at airspace, there's FAA responsibilities, there's DOD responsibilities. As you get further and further away from the Earth, eventually it's all NASA. Once you get out, towards, certainly much of the solar system and out to our galaxy, that's all NASA. And when we start, thinking about things like, and this will be, David will get to this, observations beyond the Earth's atmosphere. I think this change in language lets us also think about outward, further out in the solar system as well.
Hello, everybody. My name is Federica Bianco. I am an astrophysicist and a data scientist, and I bring this perspective to the panel. So for the next few minutes, I want to emphasize some of the things that my colleagues have already mentioned about the data, particularly the status of the data that exists, and what the data that we should collect to really understand UAP may be. We've already heard in a few cases by a few people that NASA's role is to explore the universe through the scientific method. The application of the scientific method to discovery requires that the data meet some standards that allow the data-driven approach. And there are many standards that have been established in the scientific community over the years. I can mention one, for example. It's called the FAIR standard, where FAIR stands for findability, accessibility, interoperability, and reusability. The current status of the data about UAPs does not meet these standards. The data collection is inconsistent, it's inhomogeneous, it's uncalibrated, the data are poorly documented and largely incomplete. They're also not systematically retrievable, which poses a problem in automation of the analysis. So UAP could benefit from data science and machine learning methods, from artificial intelligence that is developing at a rapid pace, but machine learning and AI cannot be applied until the data meet these standards. Even to study a single event currently requires a significant lift in retrieving the data and the metadata that may or may not be available. And this lift is at the moment entirely person-powered, which means that it cannot be automated to apply machine learning methods. Organized repositories need to exist to enable the automation of retrieval of the data and the metadata, and this is a necessary premise to enable the systematic scientific approach to the study of UAPs. Anomaly detection is a well-developed, although notoriously hard discipline, and which has seen tremendous advances recently with data science and machine learning. Usually, this means detecting rare and unusual signals in a complex that is noisy and rich with phenomena that we know. So there are two general approaches to anomaly detection in the scientific community. One is the following. If we know the signal that we expect, we can model it, and we can simulate it and maybe inject it in our data. So we can develop methods that are specific to finding those exact signals or signals that are similar to those. And we might be able to conceptualize signals coming from physical systems that respond to the laws of physics as we know them, but we cannot comprehensively produce all possible signals that could relate to or explain UAPs. So the alternative approach in detecting anomalies requires a thorough and deep understanding of what is normal and usual to tease out what is unusual and unlike the rest. These methods typically fall in the realm of what we call unsupervised machine learning. What is usual, maybe the balloons, the aircrafts, and a wealth of natural phenomena that we have heard of. And what is unusual, what is an anomaly, means anything in that is not consistent with the way in which those things look in our data. Once the anomalous signal is detected, it can be studied in more depth, either through the discovery data itself, but that may not be sufficient. So then we may need to collect additional data to study these anomalies. And this is something that in astrophysics we typically refer to as follow-up data. This can be very hard, especially if the phenomena that are anomalous are also ephemeral in time. So you have to promptly respond to the detection and set up follow-up observations. It's an extremely hard game, but it's something that is seeing a large development in astrophysics in recent years with the study of anomalous detections in the universe. This approach relies entirely on a comprehensive and systematic organization of the data, which is paramount, and on a deep understanding of all the data that is actually usual and known. The data that we might want to collect ideally will be collected in a multi-sensor and multi-platform and multi-site manner. Eyewitnesses reports, I want to elevate what Dr. Drake said, cannot ascertain the nature of UAPs. However, they should be considered because they may contain important information, for example, persistent sighting locations or seasonality. But they only really work if joined with quantitative data collected by sensors, as well as biophysical and psychophysical assessments of the witness and the impact that the experience has on them to really reveal the nature of UAPs. You've heard it from my colleagues a number of times. The data needs to be collected by sensors that need to be calibrated or calibratable. So we need to collect not only the data, images, sounds, spectral characterization of what we see, but metadata. The sensor type, the brand of the sensor, the noise characteristics, time of the acquisition, instrument sensitivity, as well as information about the circumstances of the data collection, for example, temperature, or the location, or the conditions in which the sensor is at the time of collecting the data. The data should be collected simultaneously by different platforms, ideally in different locations in a multi-sensor system. So some of the data that we may want to collect are images, but also temperature, sound recording, spectral data emissivity that tells you the color in a very fine grid, as well as monitoring the motion of objects, which has been very important to identify what we have seen as UAPs that have been reported. Much of this certainly can be achieved with professional-grade infrastructure, and both new and existing infrastructure to do that, such as astrophysical and geographical observatories, both on the ground and satellites. Some modern observatories in particular are designed for the detection of time anomalies specifically, as well as for the detection of objects that move rapidly in space, near-Earth objects, asteroids, meteors, etc. So those could be leveraged for the study of UAPs. There is also some effort ongoing in the developing of facilities that are specifically designed to detect UAPs, and many of those comply with the characteristics that I just described. This level of information, though, can also be obtained by the public. We could crowdsource the data collection if a platform to crowdsource exists that supports the collection of data and metadata and the transmission of data and metadata. And we think that NASA might be able to play an important role in the development of this platform.
Yeah, please feel free to say this is a bad idea. But if you thought about synthetic data, as you were talking, I was thinking, given the fact we don't have enough quality data to train a neural net, if we were to generate synthetic data based on the information we do have and then filling out the other characteristics as we might guess, does that then help us train something to iterate an AI to be able to find other correlations within data as we get it?
So we do it all the time in data science, right? We do generate data sets where the data sets are sparse or scarce, and we cannot train machine learning models. It's a risky business because in the data that we generate, we embed the bias that we have. So we embed our thinking about the data, the way in which we think the data looks, and the way in which we think the anomalies look. So particularly in anomaly detection, it is a very difficult thing to do to try to make sure that you don't bias your models to what you know.
All right, good afternoon. My name is David Grinspoon. I'm a planetary scientist and astrobiologist, and I'm going to talk for just a couple of minutes about how observations beyond Earth are relevant to our study of UAPs. Many of NASA's missions are, at least in part, focused on answering the question of whether life exists beyond Earth. Astrobiology is the study of the origin, evolution, distribution, and future of life in the universe. As part of this, we consider how to search for biosignatures, observations we can make of other planets which might betray the presence of life. So we look for things like anomalous gases in the atmospheres of planets and other anomalies which may possibly reveal the presence of life. When we discover such an anomaly, we don't conclude that we've discovered life. We seek more data to understand what we're seeing, and often this leads to other new discoveries. Similarly, we can talk about looking for technosignatures, observations we can make which might reveal the presence of technological activity somewhere else. NASA is also supporting some research studying technosignatures. While there is at present no evidence we're aware of suggesting an extraterrestrial source for UAPs, these existing NASA programs are relevant to the question of UAPs in at least two ways. First, researchers in astrobiology and SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, have focused for many years on techniques and methods for identifying anomalous signatures and determining if they have mundane natural explanations, as opposed to revealing unknown biological or even technological activity. The SETI community has expertise and methodologies for determining whether a potential technosignature is in fact a natural phenomenon or misinterpreted terrestrial technology. When a possible technosignature is observed, we ask, is it a real signal? Is it a known or unknown natural phenomena? Must it be technological? Is it known terrestrial technology? So these scientific communities have relevant experience in determining and communicating about whether observations which first appear to reveal extraordinary evidence actually justify making extraordinary claims. Second, if we do acknowledge an extraterrestrial source, however unlikely, as one possibility for UAPs, then these objects must have traveled through the solar system to get here. Within the scientific community, there's a widespread, but by no means universal belief that there are extraterrestrial civilizations. And we have a well-developed rationale. There's a lot of literature for discussing this, which I won't go into now in the interest of brevity, but it has to do with the vast numbers of exoplanets and the timescales of evolution and the possibility of convergent evolution on different planets leading to somewhat similar outcomes. It's a fascinating subject, but the relevant point here is that the same rationale which supports the idea that extraterrestrial civilizations may exist and may be detectable also supports the idea that finding extraterrestrial artifacts in our own solar system is at least plausible. NASA is the lead agency for solar system exploration. It already has an active program of detecting objects in our solar neighborhood using both ground-based and space-based facilities, and it could leverage those capabilities to search for objects in space with anomalous motion, anomalous trajectories, unusual light curves, anomalous spectral signatures, or other characteristics. Most of the solar system has not been searched for artifacts or anomalies, and these modest data analysis efforts could potentially be applied to existing and planned planetary missions. The galaxy does not stop at the edge of the solar system, and the solar system does not stop at the top of the Earth's atmosphere. It's all a continuum of possibilities worthy of investigation. If NASA applies the same rigorous methodology toward UAPs that it applies to the study of possible life elsewhere, then we stand to learn something new and interesting, whatever the ultimate explanation is of those phenomena.
So you can call it my slide deck if you want. Thank you. So it's not the charge of our panel to evaluate UAP evidence, but part of our statement of task is to assess the scientific analysis techniques that are available. You don't have to start it just yet, and how we might use them to determine physical constraints on UAP. The UAP reports with the most detailed contextual information are the ones from the Navy aviators. And they're using a combination of ranging and infrared imaging information. And for these cases, we can directly calculate critical parameters of a UAP, such as altitude and velocity, under certain assumptions. And it's, the main point I want to make here is that this multi-sensor approach is absolutely critical to charting a path forward for UAP investigations, and that pertains to NASA as well. So I'm going to provide one example here just to illustrate the crucial role of science and scientific analysis, and the role of scientific analysis to avoid misinterpretation in some sense. Next build. Just hit space. Yeah, okay, so this is, this video was recorded by pilots deployed from the aircraft carrier USS Theodore Roosevelt in 2015. The example has been given the nickname Go Fast because it gives an impression of an object moving very rapidly against the ocean surface. And the question is this impression correct? And if not, what can we say quantitatively about what that object is doing in kind of Earth-centered coordinate system? Fortunately, the information needed to determine the altitude and velocity of this object is contained on the display. So go ahead and next. And this includes the elevation angle of the camera, the azimuth angle of the camera, the target range in nautical miles, aircraft altitude, the time reference in seconds, indicated airspeed in knots. This information in this video in particular has been discussed quite a bit on the web. So let's begin with the object altitude. Next, please. So knowing the jet's altitude and the bearing to the target, we can apply basic trigonometry to figure out where that object is in altitude space. And it turns out to be, provided the range information is accurate, which can have some uncertainties associated with it, but the object appears to be at about 13,000 feet. An important aspect of this here is that it's sort of midway between the jet and the ocean. So it's the ocean that looks like it's right behind it is actually 4.2 miles away. And this is our first indication that some or most of the motion that we observe, the apparent motion of the object, is in fact due to the rapid motion of the sensing platform, which is about 430 miles per hour in this case. But we don't have to guess about this. So we have enough information on this display to actually reconstruct the encounter. Go to the next slide, please. And so this is what this is. This is using additional information on the screen, including the time axis. And so we know that this aircraft is banking about 15 degrees left, and you can compute through a simple calculator the approximate radius of curvature of the flight. And the bottom line is, I won't go into detail here, but if you can get the bearing and range to the target at two locations with known separation in time, you can figure out how far it moved. And in this case, this object moved about 390 meters in 22 seconds, and that corresponds to a velocity of just 40 miles per hour. And so that's a velocity that's consistent with wind speeds at 13,000 feet. So it's not our task to conjecture what this object is, but it's an example that illustrates the type of data needed to determine critical parameters that will help us identify such objects going forward. In addition to the importance of quantitative analysis, this example also serves to illustrate the kind of cognitive bias we have to contend with for UAPs recorded from unfamiliar perspectives. And Sean Kirkpatrick showed another example of that. This is a parallax effect case.
Thanks. That was actually very helpful for everyone, I'm sure. Just one piece of clarification on the video that we showed. The second one that was the newly released one had the three aircraft in it. The question was asked about if it was a stabilized background against which the jitter was showing. I am not 100% certain of that answer. It might just be a bunch of dust on that sensor, but let me go back and get you a more fulsome answer. It is either stabilized background or it's just garbage, but in either event, the three aircraft are jittering because of the platform. But that's another example of exactly what you're saying, right? It's the perception of the operator who thinks it's doing something else when it's actually just your own camera. Right.
Yeah, if I could just, Sean, in your event, it seemed to me that what you mean by jitter in this case is the plane is actually making motions that are causing a parallax.
So it's actually more than that. So the plane will move, and that'll cause the parallax that you just showed. But the sensor itself, a lot of these cameras are in gimbals, For those of you not certain what a gimbal is, it's the thing that your cameras sit on, your telescopes sit on, it moves it around in different directions. Those can sometimes be stabilized, in which case they damp out the motion of the platform. And in other cases, they're not, and they jump around. And so what you're actually seeing in that video is what we call jitter of the sensor against the platform. So the platform's moving and the sensor is moving. It's not a stabilized against the target. But once it's collected, sometimes in processing, the background is stabilized frame to frame, just like some of those TikTok videos you see, right? Same idea.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in here. I think make a couple of comments to just follow up on what Josh said. In my experience of flying, over 15,000 hours, 30-something years in airplanes and both in space, and the environment that we fly in, space or an atmospheric flight, very, very conducive to optical illusions. So I get it why these pilots would look at that go fast video and think it was going really, really fast. I remember one time I was flying in the warning areas off of Virginia Beach, military operating area there, and my Rio thought, the guy that sits in the back of the Tomcat, was convinced we flew by a UFO. So I didn't see it. We turned around. We went to go look at it. It turns out it was Bart Simpson, a balloon. Oftentimes in space, I would see things and I was like, oh, that's really not behaving like it should. It doesn't have the trajectory of a satellite or a planet on the back of the star field. And every single time when I would look at it long enough, I would realize that it was atmospheric lensing. It was the fact that what I was looking at was actually flying behind the atmosphere, and because of variations in the atmosphere, it made the trajectory look like it wasn't going in a straight line. It was going like this, and it would go like that, and it would turn in the other direction. Was always the case. My brother, Mark Kelly, a former NASA astronaut, and also now a U.S. Senator, I was with him for dinner last night, and he shared a story with me again that he had shared years ago, but I had kind of forgotten about it, and I think it's worth sharing. And that is when he was the commander of STS-124, I think it was, in 2008, they were getting ready to close the payload bay doors of the space shuttle. And before they do that, you got to make sure nothing interferes with the doors, because if the doors don't close properly, the space shuttle can't re-enter the atmosphere. It would come apart. It's part of the structural integrity of the vehicle. So they see something in the payload bay, and they thought it was a tool, maybe a bolt. They couldn't quite figure it out. They were potentially going to have to go and do a spacewalk to retrieve it. But before they did that, my brother grabbed a camera, they took a picture of it, and when they blew up the picture, they realized that this is not a bolt or a tool in the payload bay. It was actually the International Space Station that was 80 miles away. I mean, that's just a really good example of how this environment we operate in is so conducive to optical illusions. Oftentimes, guys fly into the water. I mean, there are cases where, pilots have rendezvoused on a buoy because they thought that was their wingman. It's just very, very challenging environment to work in, especially at night. And in my experience, the sensors kind of have the same issues as the people's eyeballs.
But before I open it up, I just wanted to restate Federica's answer to Mike for hay. If you know the properties of hay very well, and you go through your haystack and say, I don't know what this is, but it doesn't look like hay. You don't need to have a match filter looking for a needle in a haystack if you know hay very well.